Baboyan. Cermak.
Here.
Clifford.
Here.
Dombrowski. Farrow.
Is this the? It is. Okay. Yes.
Heidelback Teramoto.
Here.
Harada.
Here.
Huffman. Jacobson. Leff.
Here.
Lynch. Nevidal.
Here.
Nikita.
Here.
Peck.
Here.
Ron.
Okay. Oh, no, you don't. No.
Stevenson.
Keith.
Sweeney. Todd.
Here.
Williams.
For a minute, I might.
Woolsey.
Here.
Wu. You.
Here.
Quorum is established.
Great, thank you. So the first item on our agenda today is an informal presentation by John Halligan. Is he? Yes, he's here. Thank you for coming. He's the branch chief of compliance and enforcement branch at Cal Cannabis, and he will be presenting on the California Cannabis Track and Trace System. Welcome.
Can you hear me? Everybody hear me? Okay, good. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the board. Like they said, my name is John Halligan. I'm the Compliance and Enforcement Branch Chief at Cal Cannabis Cultivation Licensing Division. MCRSA mandates that the California Department of Food and Agriculture, in consultation with the Bureau of Cannabis Control, establish a track and trace program for reporting the movement of cannabis and cannabis products throughout the distribution chain that uses unique identifiers. Additionally, the mandate requires the creation of a database containing electronic shipping manifests to facilitate the administration of the track and trace program. On behalf of all the three licensing authorities, I'm here today to provide you with an overview of the track and trace system, how the track and trace system is built, how unique identifiers are issued and function in the system, the 5-step process annual licensees need to take to secure access to the system and begin using it, what we are doing to ensure law enforcement and agencies have access to the shipping manifest information in the track and trace system, and finally, the system training and support resources available to system users. First, no government IT system worth its salt operates without a good, solid acronym. Ours is CCTT metric. That's a mouthful, I know, but going forward, we're all likely to hear it very often, and so it's good to know what it stands for. So CCTT stands for the California Cannabis Track and Trace. The software that we use and our vendor is Franwell Incorporated. The software is Metric. Metric stands for Marijuana Enforcement Tracking and Reporting Compliance. CCT Metric is a compliance management solution used by the three licensing authorities for the oversight of the licensed cannabis industry. The state's contract with Franwell is for software as a service, which means Franwell owns the Metric software and works with the three licensing authorities to make configuration changes to base software functionality to meet all California-specific regulatory requirements. The California-specific software is then deployed for use by the licensees and the licensing authorities. The system is cloud-hosted, online system that is required to be used by all annual licensees. Metric software is currently being used as a track and trace system in several other states, including Colorado, Oregon, Maryland, and several others. The contract was secured and Franwell came on board in late July 2017 with a mandated implementation date of MCRSA of January 1st, 2018. Franwell, with the support of CDFA's IT project team and designated subject matter experts from CDFA, working in collaboration with key management and staff from BCC and CDPH, hit the ground running to identify and make the necessary configuration changes to the system in order to make the system critical functionality available January 1st. I'd like to say on behalf of the dedicated, hardworking Metric and licensing authority staff who worked tirelessly and made personal sacrifices in exchange for making history, I'm proud to say that the seemingly impossible task was accomplished, and the CCT Metric system was deployed and was available to accommodate annually licensed commercial cannabis businesses on January 1st, 2018. One of the ways we use to describe how the metric system is built is to think about it as an office building with the cannabis industry all located in the same building. In this office building, there are many suites, and each suite in the office building is occupied by one of the licensed commercial cannabis businesses, cultivators, processors, retailers, manufacturers, etc. Each licensed business has its own employees, and the owner provides designated employees with access to their own individual suites. Folks in the suites can do business with other businesses located in other suites on the same floor, on different floors, but they can't directly access the suite of another business unless specifically authorized to do so by the owner of that suite or as allowed by the landlord. All the businesses in the buildings share the same IT network. Each business uses the network to report their unique business operations and transfers of product between businesses documented in the commonly used IT system. The landlord of the building has a master key which allows access to all the suites and can view all the transactions reported in the IT network. The landlord maintains the office building and the IT network and troubleshoots and supports the business of the IT needs, the business and IT needs of all the businesses in the suites. In that analogy, of course, the landlord are the licensing authorities and the IT system is metric. For folks that are a little more technical in nature and want a little more detail, this slide depicts at a high level both the back office and the front office organizational structure of the system. On the right side is the industry-facing portion of the system. This starts with the role-based interface, which allows all annual licensees to use it, and they're required to. Licensees will report required activities and events occurring at their licensed facilities, which feed the commercial cannabis supply chain as cannabis and cannabis products are produced. Packaged, transferred, transformed, infused, tested, repackaged, so on and so forth, and then ultimately sold to the public. The left side of the slide depicts the back office function of the system, which is primarily used by the licensing authorities. Back office functionality includes the interfaces for each of the 3 licensing systems. It also provides the ability to monitor, track, and track cannabis and cannabis products produced and packaged by any given licensee or any type of licensee, and to monitor the chain of custody as products are transferred between licensees. The system's ability to capture reported activities and events and provide the data by facility, by license type, or even industry-wide provides the licensing authorities with the ability to analyze data and information in real time for a variety of purposes in support of their respective administrative and oversight roles and responsibilities. The most critical function of the system is its ability to track and trace cannabis and cannabis products through the commercial supply chain. Protecting against inversion and diversion to the commercial cannabis market and protecting the health and safety of the public is paramount. So the system must have the ability to track all transfers and also trace potentially tainted cannabis and cannabis products back to their source. This is accomplished through the application of a unique identifiers to all plants and packages produced and transferred. This slide, again, at a high level, depicts the entire plant and package tagging life cycle in the system. The system life cycle begins naturally with the cultivation of plants. It begins with planting either by seed or by clone and the UID tagging of immature plant lots. Once plants begin to flower or move to the licensee's designated canopy area, individual UID tags are required to be applied to each plant. Upon harvest, the harvest batch is created in the system, and once drying, trimming, and curing activities are complete, UID package tagging of cannabis flower and leaf of the harvest occurs. At that point, UID packaged product can be transferred to another licensee. UID package tag products are transferred and manufactured for extraction and or infusion into various cannabis products for retail sale to the public. All cannabis and cannabis products produced, transferred, and sold by a licensee must have an associated UID plant or package tag. Additionally, all transfers of product between licensees must be accompanied by a cannabis transportation manifest that is generated by the system. The system assigns a non-repeating, globally unique ID for each plant and distinct progeny unit. This is done by the issuance of an encrypted radio frequency identification tag to licensees for every plant or unit. Although there are two types of tags, the same underlying UID assignment and the RFID technology is used for both types of tags. UID tags are provided at no direct cost to the licensees. The cost of all tags are built into the annual license fees paid by licensees, which means licensees will not receive an invoice from the state or Franwell for payment of UID tags they order or use. Both plant and package tag provisioning and distribution starts with the licensee placing an order for UID tags using the system itself. Once an order is received by Franwell, the ordered UID tags are printed. Physical RFID tags start as a blank roll loaded onto a machine that prints a variety of specific information on the tag itself. If you look at the slide, some of that information includes the facility name, the license number, the order information. There's also a blank area on the back of the tag, as well as the metric seal. During the provisioning process, each tag is also assigned a unique ID in the database itself. The assigned UID, which is used to track and record the chain of custody events within the system, along with the facility license number, is encoded onto the RFID chip, which is embedded inside each tag. As you can see, the assigned UID is printed on the outside of the tag as well and barcoded. And the assignment of the UID to the license facility is recorded into the metric database. So once the tag is provisioned, the UID is assigned, it's encoded onto the chip, and then also mirrored in the system for the assignment. Once completed, plant and package tags are distributed to the licensee. Through the system, licensees have the visibility to view the status of the tag provisioning process. They can see when the tags are printed, they can see when printing has been completed, and they can see when the tags are shipped. Once the tags are physically received by the licensee uses the system to confirm receipt of the tags. Confirmation of the physical receipt releases the assigned UIDs that are in the system. At that point, the licensee can proceed to assign UIDs to plants or packages in their existing inventory, if they have any, or to cannabis or cannabis products that they produced. As mentioned previously, UID plant tagging begins with immature lots of cannabis plants. Each lot can be comprised of up to 100 plants of the same strain or cultivar. Lot tagging is a California-specific requirement, is not unique or part of the base coding within the metric system. So the system has been configured to accommodate immature lot tagging. Statute requires that each plant be assigned a UID and that the UID be placed at the base of the plant or otherwise required by law or regulation. Current regulations require the UID associated with an immature plant lot be placed on each immature plant in the lot. Labels containing the UID from the plant tag that was assigned to the lot must be created by the licensee and placed accordingly. Licensees have the choice to assign an individual UID plant tag to an immature plant, as long as that immature plant resides within the designated canopy area, as indicated on the premises diagram. A UID plant tag is assigned, as I said, to an individual plant when it begins to flower or is in its designated canopy area. It must be attached to the main stem of the plant or the base of each plant with a tamper evidence strip or a zip tie. And it also must be visible and in clear view for inspection purposes. UID plant tags are durable. They're made of water-resistant materials. They have ultraviolet-resistant thermal coating and use UV light-fast ink. The UV coating is receptive to the use of a Sharpie marker for folks who want to record strain or cultivar information on the blank portion of the tag. I've been told by Framwell that the plants have been extensively tested and used in other states and retain their security, authentication, and RFID functionality in a wide variety of conditions, typically found in indoor, outdoor, and mixed light cultivation sites. So I'm going to now pivot to package tags. Similar to plant tags, UID package tags contain the RFID chip embedded in the tag, and they have the UID coded onto the tag. The difference with a package tag, they're adhesive back tags, so they can be applied directly to a package, plastic package, a box, or any other container used for the product. They're required to be used for all transfers of products and packages to identify the chain of custody of that product, and they also come with a perforation, so the barcode and UID can be torn off the main tag and applied to a subsequent repackaged product. Any amount of cannabis or cannabis products sold, manufactured, or transferred must contain a UID package tag, and it must be affixed to the package itself. Any product that you intend to transfer from one license to another, even if the licensees are the same, owned by the same ownership and located on the same premises, still have to be package tagged prior to transfer. It is important to note and understand that the system functionality provides for cannabis and cannabis products to be repackaged prior to the finished packages being transferred to the retailer. For example, a gallon of bulk oil can be repackaged into 4 quarts. The resulting quarts can be repackaged into pints, and those pints can subsequently be used for the creation of a variety of infused cannabis products, vape pens, etc. A batch of 100 brownies can be broken up into 4 25-count packs or 25 individual, or repackaged into 25 individual packages. As original packages are repackaged, from one item to many or many items to one, the system's UID package tagging functionality continues to provide the track and trace for all the associated repackaged products. UID package tags are also used to verify receipt accuracy at the destination point, the record, and record the change of custody in the package from one license to another. As such, package tags function as the gatekeeper of the unique identifier for transported packages. Provisioning of UID package tags, like plant tags, guards against potential collaboration from unscrupulous individuals or entities attempting to defraud the system or attempting to use tag counterfeiting schemes. Currently, temporary licensees will not and do not have access to the track and trace system. Since January 1 of 2018, all transfers between licensees are still required to be documented using a manual manifest process, and that continues to be in place. All annual licensees, like I said before, will be required to use the track and trace system. As we move through the annual licensing process and get ready to issue annual license, the commercial supply chain is going to contain both temporary and annual licenses at the same time at multiple places within the supply chain. The CDFA subject matter experts have developed a transition guide, which is available within the system under the support tab that provides specific direction on how to handle transactions from temp to annual and annual to temp licensees for all license types. Currently, the CCT metric system has received annual application data from 3,849 individual businesses from all 3 licensing authority licensing systems. To ensure these applicants were aware that the system was operational and what they needed to do to secure access to the system once their annual license application was approved, the 3 licensing authorities recently released a flyer that outlines the 5 steps folks need to take. Step 1 is to submit an annual license application. After receiving an annual license application, the applicable licensing authority will provide the applicant with a confirmation notice, which includes instructions or a link on how to register for the mandatory training. Step 2, they register and complete the CCTT Account Manager New Business System training. The designated account manager for each licensee must register for and complete the training. Once the required training has been completed and the annual license has been issued, the designated account manager will be credentialed to use the system. Applicants approved to receive the annual license will not be provided access to the system until the designated account manager training has been completed. Step 3, request UID plant or package tags. After being credentialed into the system, the account manager will use the system to order the UID plant and package tags as outlined earlier in the presentation. Step 4, document physical receipt of the requested UID tags. Upon physical receipt of the tags, the licensee will current receipt in the system. Upon doing so, again, the licensee's UIDs will be released in the system, which will allow them to, licensee to take the associated tags and apply them to their existing plant or package inventory. And then lastly, assign and apply the UID and plant and package tags to the cannabis and cannabis products. Temporary licensees with on-hand inventory of cannabis or cannabis products at the time of their annual license is issued will need to assign and apply tags to all cannabis and cannabis products on the licensed premises. Folks that did not have a temporary license at the time their annual license is issued should not have any on-hand inventory to tag. So they will need to UID, tag, and report all cannabis and cannabis products produced after the effective date of their license. Licensing authority inspectors and investigators will have access to handheld RFID readers, which will provide them with the ability to easily scan the RFID embedded in each UID plant or package tag assigned in the system to the cannabis and cannabis product inventories at each licensed facility. The way it works, once they identify an site that they want to inspect, proprietary software in Metric allows the upload of the tag, UID tag information into the RFID reader. The inspector will then go to the site in the designated inventory area. Then they just push the RFID tag. It will read all the tags within that room. It will then bring back results for to ensure that all the tags that are supposed to be in the room are there. If there's any tags missing, it'll tell you which tags are missing, or if there's any tags in the room that aren't supposed to be in the room, it will bring back that information as well. The RFID reader, combined with that system, the unique system functionality, will allow the licensing authorities to quickly and easily compare on-hand inventory with inventory reported in the system, which will facilitate and should reduce the duration of certain on-site inspections. In addition to the UID and plant tagging functionality, all cannabis and cannabis products transferred between licensees must be accompanied by a completed shipping manifest. A transportation manifest must be created anytime a package moves from one licensee to another. Only licensed distributors can transport packages between licensees, and only licensed laboratories can transport package test samples. Although it's a bit difficult to see, I know on the slide, the shipping manifest contains a significant amount of information, including information for both the originating and the destination licensee, including the license number, the address, contact person, phone number, etc. Estimating actual departure and arrival times at each location, package UID numbers associated with all cannabis products that are in the vehicle that is transporting the products, as well as a description of the products being transported. It also includes information about the driver, including their driver's license number, the vehicle license number used to transport the products. During transportation, the licensed distributor is required to maintain a copy of the shipping manifest and make it available upon request to agents of the Department of Consumer Affairs and law enforcement officers. One of the unique things that happens in the system through the shipping manifest process is that once the destination or the receiver of the products validates that the the materials that are shipped are accurate and accepts that. They do so in the system, and then the inventory automatically transfers from the shipping entity to the receiving entity in the system. So it's not needed to do entry into the system upon receipt. CDFA's IT project team, in partnership with the Department of Justice and the California Department of Technology, have been working in the past several months to develop an interface for the exchange of track and trace information, specifically the cannabis transportation manifest data, to law enforcement agencies who use the Cannabis Law Enforcement Telecommunication System, also known as CLETS. CLETS is an efficient law enforcement communication network available to all public law enforcement in the state. The purpose of the interface is to allow law enforcement agencies to validate transported cannabis by accessing shipping manifest information while operating in the field. The interface will pass to and from the system to allow law enforcement to determine whether or not the cannabis products in question are associated with a commercial cannabis transaction between two legally licensed businesses. Currently, the DOJ CLETS interface has been fully developed and is in the process of end-to-end testing. Once testing is complete, documentation necessary for law enforcement to know how to use the system will be finalized. Currently, the projected timeframe for deploying the DOJ CLETS interface is the end of fall 2018. In addition to the account manager new business training, there's also other training resources that are available to applicants and licensees. First of all, Metric has instructional videos that are available on their metric.com website through the YouTube application for all the various aspects of the system. In addition to the recorded webinar, account manager and new business training that we're currently providing 3 days a week, both in morning and afternoon sessions, we'll also be offering a facilitated webinar where folks who are participating will be able to ask questions to Framwell training experts and provide responses to their individual questions. We're hoping to roll that out very soon. Once users are in the system and have had some experience using the system, they'll have the ability to take advanced Metric user training that will be facility specific. It will include cultivator, distributor, manufacturer, lab, and retail specific advanced training. Finally, third-party vendors who wish to develop interfaces or secure an API with the Metric system, there's a recorded webinar that's currently available to them. In the past, there's been several workshops that have been conducted by Framwell, and there's a long laundry list of approved vendors who have approved APIs to the CCTT Metric system. Users in the system will be able to take advantage of the support tab within Metric. It includes a Metric manual, which is the base Metric functionality, and it's a user guide. It's very detailed, has screenshots, step-by-step instructions. They'll also have a California-specific supplemental guide because there have been substantial changes to the base configuration of Metric in order to accommodate California's regulations. They'll have the transitional guide, which I mentioned earlier, for temp to annual and annual to temp transactions, and there'll also be other training resources available as they're developed through the support tab. And then finally, we will have interactive track and trace support, either via an email or via phone call at the Metric support line. We're prepared to answer just about any question that's provided by any licensee type via that phone line, because we understand the transition and use of Metric is going to be a challenge for the industry as we move forward, and we want to support them to the greatest extent that we possibly can. That's what I had for you today. So if you had any questions, I'd be happy to.
Thank you so much. I would just like to announce that since we've been joined by Mr. Bolbian, Mr. Farrow, and Ms. Huffman since we took our roll call. So now open it up to questions from the committee members for Mr. Halligan. Yep, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Quick question on CLETS. So who is the point person if we wanted to get more detailed information about how the program works and how local law enforcement can plug into it?
Well, I would refer you to our project manager, the CDFA project manager. His name's Chris Cox. He's the one who's the primary point of contact with DOJ as well as CDT on the development of that interface.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Oh, yep, Dr. Cermak.
Tim Cermak here. So my understanding is that this is up and running in some version in Colorado.
That's correct. That's my understanding.
What are the major difficulties that have arisen there?
You would have to direct those questions to Franwell. I'm not sure what specific issues that they've had with the metric in Colorado.
And
It's been deployed for a couple of years now, I believe.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
It's been deployed for a couple of years now successfully in Colorado. I'd be happy to bring information back, if you like, to the committee.
Has there been any successful hacking of the system?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are there
I
any
know they have
efforts been made?
There have been some issues with APIs, third-party APIs being used in unanticipated ways that have had adverse impacts to the system.
And what difficulties have occurred? And this looks like a lot of work.
Yeah,
And
we're lucky we have a great team working on this.
I'm not trying to say that it doesn't have value, but it does look like a lot of work. And I'm wondering if you can say anything in terms of what we've learned in Colorado regarding compliance, cost in terms of extra amount of labor or time required by the people using the system.
I'm afraid I don't have any specific knowledge to the issues that Colorado's experienced with the metric software system. I'm sorry.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. Mr. Fair.
In your presentation, we heard about how things work optimally. What is the contingency we have should the system go down, and then how do we continue to have the, I mean, it could create a significant, if the system as a general goes down, in a lot of operators being shut down and being able to do their work, I would think. Is there a contingency for that, or do we have we thought about that?
Well, the SLAs, the service level agreements within the contract require that the system be up 24/7 and available 365 days a year. I do know that Franwell has built in some excess capacity on their servers to anticipate the large number of licensees that could be using the system here in California. We expect it to be a little bit larger in any of the other states that they previously have worked in, and so they built in some excess server capacity to anticipate that load on the system. That's one thing they've done, I know.
Yes, Ms. Yu.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation, Mr. Halligan. Just wanted to check with you to see how the industry metrics will be used.
The industry metrics will be used by who specifically?
The industry metrics that are collected from the track and trace.
The licensing authorities will, through the back-end office portion of the system, will be regularly monitoring for anomalies within the system. That will help us identify potential areas for additional training that might be needed, as well as follow-up investigation. So we're required to do that by statute at CDFA, and then coordinate any anomaly detection with the other licensing authorities. So that's how we plan to use it. I believe there'll be a lot of requests for information, at least in aggregate, out of the system by legislatures and others, and even local agencies and law enforcement specifically. The statute requires that we do provide access to the system or data out of the system to both local agencies and law enforcement. But otherwise, otherwise the data is protected as confidential and not subject to Public Records Act requests.
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Oh, 1 second, Ms. Huffman, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. There's a lot involved, as one of our board members has mentioned. So the tag goes on the plant, and then that number is tracked all the way through from the driver. My question is, who enforces it? I mean, are they randomly stopped, the driver to make sure that number, I mean, I'm not sure how it's enforced, this process.
I think I would need to defer to BCC and their enforcement of the actual distributors who fall under their licensed authority. I wouldn't want to speak on their behalf. But
Process when, you know, is there, depending upon the county, depending upon the municipality, how is that followed? I mean, I understand, obviously, the reason probably why you tag it is so if there's any, you know, a bad grow, you can track it back to that particular plant, I would think, or
Correct.
making sure that, you know, just a lot of different reasons, but there's this process, but I'm just wondering who enforces this whole process?
Well, first, from CDAFA's perspective, specifically in my branch, I have special investigators who are currently making direct connection with temporary licensees throughout the state. They've conducted over 1,300 license inspections of temporary. They're up in Humboldt County this week doing inspections. We plan on using the RFID devices to go out periodically during various times during the cultivation life cycle to ensure that plants are tagged when they're supposed to be tagged, and then also at the point of harvest to go out and ensure that the harvest batches that are created and packaged are associated with the specific RFID tags that were designated and assigned in the system for that harvest batch. So that's what CDFA will be doing to enforce that. We also have contracts currently with 7 agricultural commissioners throughout the state, and we're through a pilot program that we've established with them, and Humboldt is one of those counties, Mendocino as well. And so they're supplementing our field resources, and eventually they will also have the ability to review and scan RFID tags at cultivation sites.
Ms. Huffman?
All the other licensing authorities as well will have RFID readers as well, so they'll be able to go into retail establishments and do the same types of checks that we would be able to do at a cultivation site, at a manufacturing facility, or a retail, or a distributor. So the RFID tag and the radio frequency identification really provides our field inspectors with a very powerful tool to conduct efficient and effective inspections.
Ms. Huffman?
Afternoon. I didn't hear the beginning of your presentation, so
I'm sorry.
forgive me, but
That's okay.
it's a long drive from Sacramento. But, so if I ask a question that you addressed,
Okay.
don't hold it against me,
Sure.
but I'm a little bit confused. I know the initiative mandated this, and so I don't know what systems could be used to do it without being so elaborate. But I'm coming from the perspective, we may have overregulated this industry so that the underground market that I care about is thriving, that I wanted to eliminate. How much does this add to the cost of the end product that some of us are complaining about the high cost of doing business in California and that it's overregulated? Can you give me some idea that if I were a grower, which I'm not, or if I were whatever, the retail, how much does this add to the end product that I am trying to make a profit from, or trying to be legal with, or trying to help medicinal people? Tell me what the end cost
Sure.
might be on top of the plant cost. And then I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
I'll ask it now, so you can answer both of them. I'm curious about the application of this, I do read the Sacramento Bee, to delivery, which I'm in support of, so please answer the question biased when you answer me, because I think people have a constitutional right to this product, even though some municipalities don't like it. So can you tell me if it has any application in the future to answer the question that they have about us allowing all these people in the world to deliver marijuana to people who are ill?
Okay, I think my response to your first question with respect to the system itself, CCT metric adding to the cost of the product. In the beginning of the presentation, I did state that the cost of the tags themselves is included in the licensing fee for each license type within the distribution chain. So indirectly, the licensees are paying for the cost of the tags, but unlike in other states in which Metric operates, there's a direct invoicing for each tag that's ordered and issued. We took a different approach in California, so that's built into the licensing fees itself. So how that would translate into an increase in the cost of the actual product, that would be very difficult for me to answer. The second part of your question, I can't really speak to the delivery aspect of it, but I can tell you that the track and trace system, all products that are delivered also are required to have the RFID tag associated with them. So, for example, if the vehicle that was transporting that was pulled over by law enforcement, then they would be able to validate whether or not that product was associated with a legal business transaction.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Dr. Sermon?
I'm looking for the leaks in the system, the ways in which people might work around it. And I mean, when I think of, I'd like your assessment of what they might be. I mean, what I think of is that if I have a plant that dies or underproduces, I could use the tag on that plant, but couldn't I supplement it from my neighbor who's growing illegally and put it in with the little bit that I get out of this plant and use the same tag? I mean, aren't there sort of obvious places that, what occurs to you of places where it can be
certainly one area that's
misused?
Yes. You know, criminals are going to be criminals, and they're going to try to game the system any way they can, and it's our job to try to stay ahead of them as to much greatest extent that we possibly can. And that's one of my primary roles here at CDFA. One of the things we ourselves haven't worked directly with the system, and there's no data currently in the system, but we anticipate that plant mortality could be a place for a potential diversion of product. But the system does require that if you have plant mortality or death, you're supposed to identify which tag is associated with the plant and retire that tag in the system, and you're also required to weigh the waste of the wasted product and then record that into the system as well. The system also has basic functionality where the entire wet plant is required to be weighed at the point of harvest, or even if it's partially harvested. And then as the plant is dried and cured, the waste products from the harvest batch are then required to be recorded and weighed in the system. And so the difference between the aggregate wet weight and the waste associated with the stalks and stems, as well as the finished product, will, I believe, provide us with baseline metrics that we might be able to use to better identify anomalies based upon, for example, license size or type of license. It's not going to be a perfect science by any means, but I think it will provide us with the anomalies that we need to maybe go out and do additional investigative actions or research to find out if there is, in fact, fraud or criminal activity going on. So that's certainly one area. The tags themselves are very strongly encrypted, so I do not believe there's an effective way of producing an RFID tag the way that they're currently provisioned by Metric in the system. So that would be very difficult. But yeah, certainly, you know, people are going to try to invert and divert product from the marketplace, and that's our job to try to identify ways in which they're doing that and try to come up with countermeasures to stop that.
I'm wondering if you'd agree, but it strikes me as though the enforcement on unlicensed operations is going to need to be very strong for people to agree to comply fully with all the burden that this is going to represent for them. And I'm wondering if you agree with that.
Well, it definitely, the legal commercial marketplace will be very difficult for it to survive if you have a significant contingent of unlicensed operators in the marketplace. We have currently established relationships with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're members of the WET team, and so we share intelligence and information with DFW with respect to unlicensed grows all throughout California. So we're currently working to build upon that relationship because we do believe very strongly, even though my team are not licensed, they're not sworn peace officers, we can't take those actions directly. We want to work directly with DFW and local law enforcement to take action in any way we can and support their efforts to go after unlicensed cultivation sites.
Thank you. Any further questions?
I just have one
Yeah.
more question regarding delivery. Member Huffman just asked if any product that is delivered to someone's home will also have a tag on it. And so I just wanted to seek clarification here because everything that we see in the handout, which is very helpful, has the plants that are tagged and obviously bulk product that's tagged. But does this mean then that manufacturers, once they package the product, every single cookie, chew, pre-roll that goes out is also going to have this blue tag on it?
That's correct.
Okay.
Right down to the individual unit that's sold to a consumer, because it's important for us if the consumer somehow got a tainted product, it went through the QC and QA process somehow and ended up in the consumer's hands, that UID on that package would be the primary vehicle by which we would trace it back up the supply chain. So yes, every product will have a UID.
I have one more question.
Okay, Ms. Huffman and then Mr. Nikita.
This is intriguing. If I'm a grower and I have a harvest and I have a tag, collect those tags, then I got to start all over and hire somebody to tag the next crop I'm growing?
That is correct.
That's correct.
Every harvest batch has to be tagged, starting with the individual immature plant and then individually as the plants begin to flower or move to their designated canopy area. Yes, so subsequent harvests need new tags and need to be reapplied.
Mr. Nikita?
Yes, the several counties launched a joint powers authority called, I believe, the California Cannabis Authority. Are you cooperating with that JPA, and to what extent?
We have met with the representatives of the JPA at CDFA, and we're currently in consultation with them regarding the JPA, the construction of the JPA as well as the MOU that would have to be established in order to make that happen.
So the goal to share the track and trace data with the JPA to kind of provide the counties that are members of that JPA additional information on what's happening in their jurisdiction? I
think the goal of the JPA is to get information out of the track and trace system so they can provide it directly to the local agencies. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, down there.
Hello, Helena Williams. I actually have 3 questions. One goes back to a prior committee member's question, and I think it was actually in regards to disaster recovery for the system, not for capacity of the servers, because it is a SaaS program, it's cloud-based. We're actually talking about disaster recovery for the system if it totally goes down. Is that been in discussion, or is that part of the plan?
Well, there's definitely backup and disaster recovery protocols in place. I'm sorry, but I'm not the technical expert that would be able to provide you with the specifics with that. I'd be happy to either get that information and bring it back to the committee, or have our technical expert come to the committee and answer those questions.
Okay, thank you. Second question, there is a comment made that there is temporary operating permits as well as annual permits, and that there's going to be a transition period. I was under the understanding that of 2019, that transition period ends, and all will be annual permit operators with a mandatory entry into track and trace. Is that not true?
No, that's true. The goal for us has always been to get operators into the track and trace system. The decision was made that only annually licensed entities would be entered or provided credentialed use to the system. So,
So
yeah,
as
that's
of
ultimately the goal.
January of 2019, it'll be fully operational for annual permit holders.
Just to clarify, the system's been fully operational since January 1, 2018 for annual licensees.
Okay.
And we just don't have any annual licensees currently to be credentialed into the system.
I guess that's my confusion. If it's been fully operational and we have no annual operating permits, how can we test the program for full operability and to be able to see if the workflow is going to actually work and to see if there are any potential issues for the users?
Well, a standard process for design and development of IT systems includes user acceptance testing of the system, where they put test data through the system to ensure that the configurations are functioning properly. And that was all done and approved and signed off prior to January 1, 2018.
To anticipate any potential issues for the users?
Yeah, well, yeah, there could be. We're currently still working on configurations to the system because, as you know, the regulations have been dynamic, to say the least, during this year. And so it's difficult for locking down any IT system as the business requirements continue to change. And so we're struggling to keep up with those currently. But again, the system, critical functionality of the system has been available since January 1, 2018.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Woolsey?
And David Woolsey, I do have a question for you. Is there a plan for training local law enforcement at the beat cop level that if they make a stop and the car's full of marijuana, and that they'll know that they can request information through CLETS to find out if that's a legitimate or illegitimate operator?
Yes. In our partnership with the Department of Justice, it's my understanding that the Department of Justice will be taking the lead on developing the documentation and providing the training to law enforcement personnel throughout the state on the interface and how to use it and how to interpret data from the system. Of course, we'll be collaborating with them to ensure that's accurate and as complete as possible.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Mr. Bolian.
Yes, I had a couple of questions and comments. With Metric, I do have a little experience with it. Of all the different platforms that are available, Metric is probably the least glitchy one, if you will. The problems with it, some of them are that it's very manual in nature and it's very burdensome, especially when it comes to implementing it into an existing business project. The redundancies, one of the biggest fail points is that when you tag the plant at clone level, when you tag the plant at a flowering point, when you go to harvest it, the inputs are manual in nature. So that's probably one of the bigger fail points in the system, where if I harvest a plant that's tagged and let's say I get 3 ounces out of it, what really prevents somebody from inputting 6 ounces? So for instance, if you got a group of friends, right? One person goes and gets a license, the other people don't get their license. The guy with the license is producing his plants, he's got X amount of plants, they're all tagged, they're all legit, and now his friends also harvest their harvest, but they're not licensed. So when the friend with the license goes to input the data as far as how much weight was harvested from any given plant, and if they're smart about it, and if they're able to maintain the trim weight with the dry weight and all that, and keep that consistent, nothing really prevents somebody that harvested 3 ounces of plant from inputting 6 ounces of plant. Would that be a fair statement? As long as it reconciles afterwards and all that. Understanding that Metric really is capturing the data and providing the track and trace. Enforcement of what gets done with the data, how the data is used is separate, and that's more of a that's more on the enforcement side than it is on the data capture side. But would that be a fair statement to say that's one of the fail points in the system?
I would say, yes, that's definitely a possibility. Again, a wet weight, I think that's what you're referring to as the manual entry into the system upon harvest is the wet weight. We've also implemented here in California an actual net weight that's going to be required to be recorded, which is not something that's currently done in other states within 60 days of the harvest date, as an additional data point for us to potentially detect anomalies and create that baseline that we're looking for. But you're absolutely right. There's nothing to stop unscrupulous individuals from attempting to do that activity. And the system's not going to stop them from doing that.
Right. So to follow it up, and I'm going to lead this into the delivery side of it. So knowing that with the wet weight, the difference between wet weight and dry weight is usually between 80 to 90% of your final weight. So if I was to, for the sake of argument, say I have 100 pounds wet weight, I exaggerate that number to 200 pounds wet weight, basically doubling my harvest. I'm a fantastic grower. And then understanding that 80% is going to be lost in the drying process, and then I reduce that and end up with 160 pounds of dry weight. And knowing that that's your bigger fail point where it's manual inputs, now that the data has been inputted past the point of harvest, and now we have a final product. The final product is tagged, whether it's a flower, it's tagged whether it's a concentrate, it's tagged whatever the final version of the product is. And to kind of segue into the delivery side of it, as Ms. Huffman was talking about, one of the bigger arguments being made by local jurisdictions and law enforcement is that if deliveries are allowed to be made into cities that are not allowing for the deliveries, that somehow the gray market, the unregulated market, is going to be able to introduce their products that never went through testing, that never went through track and trace, and be able to circumvent the system, where the counter argument to that is once you get past the point of cultivation and the plant has been harvested and the data has been inputted and you're past the biggest fail point in there, and now you have actual final product with the barcode and a tag on it, the delivery becomes a moot point, because now even if it's delivered to a city that doesn't allow it, the product that's tagged is tagged, that's already part of the supply chain, and the product that's not tagged, that's part of the unregulated supply chain, regardless of you delivering to a city that allows it or not, is two completely different conversations as it relates to the oversight over the product with track and trace. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, if you're saying that unlicensed products have a separate distribution chain from the commercial cannabis supply chain, right, that we wouldn't be able to track using metric?
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
that would be a correct statement.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Oh, Kristen.
I apologize, I stepped out for part of this. I do have a couple of questions. Sorry, I stepped out for part of the presentation, my apologies.
Okay.
But I do have a couple of questions, hopefully they weren't already asked.
Okay.
And if you answered them already, you can be like, already did
okay.
that. So as folks are preparing their packaging for compliant packaging, and every package is going to need one of these tags, is there someplace online where the dimensions of these tags is listed so that folks can prepare? Because it's like NASCAR on these packages. So that's my first question.
I don't believe that's currently available on the Metric website, but I'll go back to Frammo because I recently got another question about that this week regarding the actual sizes. I've seen some of the dimensions within the procurement documents that were part of the contract that we might be able to release.
Yeah, if
so
we could get that
folks would know that
information
dimension.
Sooner than later, that would, I think, be certainly helpful for folks planning. And then earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that when you adfix a track and trace tag to, say, a lot of clones or immature plants, each of the plants need to be tagged. So can you kind of walk me through a little bit what that might look like?
Yeah, because the statute requires that every plant have a unique identifier on the tag, it was several months ago, actually in 2017 during the scoping workshops, we received a lot of feedback for folks who preferred lot tagging versus individual plant tagging. And so we developed the immature lot tagging process as part of the regulations. So what would happen, you'd be issued an individual UID plant tag that has the RFID chip. The UID number on that tag would then have to be duplicated and then put onto each of the immature plants within that plant lot. It can just be an adhesive label that you print off using your
or a hanging tag, like a plant hanger.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
Great.
Be,
and then,
as long as it has a UID on it.
Okay. And then my third question is again this conversation about wet weight. So a lot of cultivators are conducting consecutive harvests, right? And so they might be 100 plants in a bed, and the most recent regulations, the proposed permanent regulations, indicate that a cultivator would have to account for any portion of harvest taken off of any given plant. But in other states, when utilizing metric, cultivators are allowed to batch that 100 plant harvest. So they might have tags 1 through 100 as an example in bed A, and as they do their first harvest, they would list tags 1 through 100 had a total wet weight of Y. And so it doesn't appear that California is going to allow that. And I just, I'm not quite sure why that is, because this is not just metric, but a lot of folks will utilize software services, and this is how those software providers across the board handle wet weight harvest. So I'm wondering if we can get a little information about why, and if there's a way to allow for that kind of batching. And I just one thing to add to that is the labor associated with having to account for all portions of plant material removed from each plant, and then making sure that that is data entered per plant tag is so labor intensive. And when you go from a consecutive harvest to harvesting whole plants, cultivators are going to lose probably around 25% or more of their total yield, and that's something that seasonal cultivators are going to be exponentially more challenged by than, say, an all-season cultivator. So I'm just wondering if I could get some information on that, please.
Okay. Well, the individual wet weight requirement for each plant within a harvest batch, same strain, cultivated at the same time, same manner, that those individual aggregate or individual wet weights are then aggregated as a total harvest wet weight.
We
Yes.
could batch
Correct.
per bed, say.
Yes.
Okay.
So the system will aggregate the individual weights of all the plants that were within that whole harvest batch and create an aggregate wet weight for the entire harvest batch. And it's my understanding as well that any kind of trim or anything that you're doing or the waste of the harvest isn't attributed to individual plants, but to the individual harvest batch.
Right, correct. So just to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, I could then go in and remove tops from plants 1 through 100 in bed A, and I could put them into a bin, and I could weigh them all wet and say that 500 grams or whatever it was is a result of first harvest of 1 through 100.
Correct.
Okay.
They call it a partial harvest within metric. So yeah, you can do partial harvest of individual plants in metric. It has that built-in functionality.
I have one more comment on the cost of use on using metric. It's not so much the material and the monthlies and acquiring it as it is the secondhand consequences of needing personnel, and it really fits more into your compliance team. It's not as big of a deal or big of an expense for the larger operators that have, let's say, 20, 30,000 square feet plus. It is a big deal for the smaller operator that has 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet, 5,000 square feet, where the amount that you harvest and the dollar amount associated with that doesn't necessarily justify having a compliance position that's strictly on metric, on the use of the track and trace and everything, because of the fail point, for instance, with the manual inputs on that. So the average compliance person that would be responsible for metric on the low end would probably be a $60,000 a year salary position on average, call it 80 to 120,000. And if you get above the 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet, you're probably going to need two positions for that. So those are some of the additional costs that go into implementation of the track and trace, more so than the actual use of the tags and the scanners and stuff like that. Correct?
It sounds like you would know better than I do what the individual cost of a licensed entity is with respect to using of the system. I don't use the system, but I appreciate that information. That's good information for us to have, so I appreciate it.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. Okay, we're now going to move on to public comment. I just want to remind folks it's a comment, not a question, and also remind folks that there is a place later on the agenda for public comment on broader range of issues, and right now we're just doing specifically public comment on the presentation on the track and trace. Thank you. So I don't know if it says speaker 1, 2, 3 on your tags, but on my side it's left to right here. So speaker number 1.
Thank you. Susan Tibbin. I'd like to second the comment just a couple of minutes ago from one of the CAC members that this is really onerous and in some cases just impossible for the very small farmer. The other aspect that's puzzling is it doesn't seem that sequential harvesting has been addressed. Where, for instance, flowers that are getting a lot of sun on the outside of a plant or on the top might be harvested earlier. And so any given plant may be subject to numerous harvestings. The presenter talked about weighing the whole wet plant. And to me, that invokes, I don't know, like a TV movie where you hack down the whole plant and carry it off. And that's not what we as stewards of the land and medicine makers do. So there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ron Edwards. A number of things. I'm hoping that they have solved the RFID chip problem with HID lighting inside that causes false readings on that. In other states, Monday morning, Friday evening is a real bottleneck for data being put in. And for rural areas where you have slow internet, how is that going to be effective? The other thing I'm strongly going to ask for is nursery training. No other state with metric has done nurseries. The lot batch is a good idea, but trying to put an individual tag on a small plant that may or may not be rooted, these are issues that are really going to be coming up. Also going down, the small cultivator, having that 60-day period to input all of their weight. If they're a really small cottage operation and they're trimming as they're going along, they may only trim each month of what product is going out. So how is the system going to accommodate that person who may take a year to trim their product? So these are all issues that are very unique to California, and please don't overlook nurseries in the training and the setting up of metric.
Thank you. And before we move to speaker 3, I'd like to let you know for public comment, we're giving 2 minutes. There's a timer on the table. It'll go green when your time starts, yellow when 1 minute is up, and then red when your time is up. If you like to have come and submit public comment, please take an open chair and line up if you like to, if there's no chairs open. And with that, please, speaker 3.
Good afternoon, Hannah Nelson. I concur with what Ron just said entirely. I think those are important points. I also would concur with a couple of the members' concerns about contingency plans, and that actually dovetails also in terms of the rural cultivators and their access to internet and infrastructure. With respect to the concern about people gaming the system, it raised a question to me regarding the approach of education and the continuum to penalty. And I know that some of the agencies have been understanding that this is an emerging industry and a new endeavor, and that there is a need for great leeway with educational, and also that to please remember that these are the people who are voluntarily signing up for this stuff. They are the people who are coming forward to be regulated, and so sometimes it's important to not presume that they're going to be gaming the system, but rather they're there to actually do the right thing. The end cost, it involves also dedicated staff, infrastructure such as computer and internet access, backup systems, and training time. I'm curious as to how the provisional licenses are being accounted for after temporary licenses go away and annual licenses are in place. And I'm curious also about the customer service availability. With CDFA's technical support team, they're really wonderful, dedicated staff, and they're doing their best, but they often get overwhelmed. And so I think that it's important to understand also the hours of operation for technical support may have to vary then from a traditional customer service support center. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 1, go ahead.
Yes, Daniel Bridge with the Lab of Genetics. So I would like to address, basically, I would like to echo all my colleagues' sentiment that this is going to offer an undue burden on the legal market. Just the amount of labor and everything, training and housing and all the other things that we have to do with the employees in order to actually have them perform the jobs, like weighing a plant. Every plant along a large, let's say, outdoor operation is really pretty onerous on any license holder. But I would also like to just address generally, we have a very elaborate system here, for lack of a better term, It has a lot of, ins and outs and has a lot of steps to the flow chart. But what steps I don't see are the ability for any of the affected, like let's say if somebody has a test result that comes back negative and they'd like to dispute that. I don't see any kind of mechanism for disputing, any of the steps of the process that really do count, that cost a lot of money for people to be, for example, if a sample is rejected by testing and that, there may be a test, a problem with the testing lab or the sampling or anything else, there's really no recourse for an operation to challenge that as far as, you just have to basically go through the 2 steps that you have, which is remediation or destroy it. So we really need to come up with a process for everyone to basically dispute any kind of, along the supply chain, what happens to their product, especially regarding testing, transportation with law enforcement. I'm sure law enforcement officials aren't perfect. And if they basically, seize a load of product that's destined to a legal operation, in error, then there needs to be a process for regaining custody or, something along the lines with that product. And also, just as a corollary, we really have had problems up till recently
Speaker, your time is up.
with testing.
Sorry,
So
your time is up.
we need to streamline that. Thank you.
Okay, and just a quick reminder that there will be time for broader public comment after this, but right now the public comment's just on the track and trace presentation. Thank you.
Speaker 2, go ahead.
Dan Close, and I'm one of those hippies that shook hands with somebody a long time ago, like way before medical, and tried to own property with somebody with a vision that didn't even include medical. And of course, everyone thought medical was a gaming thing, and now it's widely accepted. Coca-Cola is going to do CBD. Let's get real. So young people that worked there that had money, I'm literally having my land stolen from me at this moment, literally. And a lot of that is because the people with money got together and put the title in their name, transferred titles, did all this behind my back. And now I'm recycling to get by, put gas in my car, and I was at the food bank to get free produce before I came here. You're killing the small farmers. Average business takes, it's supposed to be in the red for 1 year, okay? Now, the people with the money are going to be buying it up. And the people that built this industry, that started everything, are going to get pushed and rolled over just like me everywhere. And so what we need to do is come up with something different than the hammer. It's not like you go tell, we're going to go tell on our friends that are smart enough to be, not involved in this, to make sure that we can pay all the fees to be compliant. That ain't going to happen. So I don't know. I think there's got to be a lot of discretion. There's got to be a lot of transition. And it's kind of understood that the black market's going to thrive for a really long time. And what are you going to do to make sure that everybody who's been doing it right from the beginning doesn't get crushed? The guy who's stealing my land was growing in a wetland. He tried to attack me when I pointed out that his area that he applied to have permitted was a wetland, and I knew that. I'm that
Your
far
time
away
is
from
up.
being a hydrologist.
Sorry, your time is up. And I'm sorry, I'd like to I'm sorry, your time is up, sir.
Sure.
I would like to reiterate that we're only taking public comment on the current item, which is the track and trace system. Speaker 3, please.
Hi, my name is Miles. I work for a local cannabis company here in Humboldt called Northern Emeralds. First, I want to thank all the members of the committee for being here. It is a long drive from Sacramento, and we really do appreciate when you all come up here and give us some face time and show that you're listening. It means a lot to the community here. So I did want to comment. So one of my jobs on the management team for the company I work for is to do labor costing, and we just did the first 6 months of 2018 on our labor costing for a cultivation site that is running completely legally both on the local and the state level and using the local track and trace Cal Origin system that Humboldt mandates. And so what we found was that in the 6 months of data that the track and trace physical cultivation labor added between 1% and 5% to our overall expected cultivation labor cost, and that's just physically dealing in the rooms with the tags. It's not really any of the additional tech admin stuff, which is oftentimes where it gets even more costly to pay people to do that sort of work. So that may not seem like a lot, 1 to 5% off the bat, but in an industry where the costs of operation seem to be going up on all fronts, every fraction of a percent matters for a company like ours at this point. So it is significant, and that wasn't really addressed. Maybe the cost of the tags are baked into the license fees, but it's really the labor where we get hit by these systems. And so I also wanted to make a couple other quick comments. That is just using the local track and trace system. When Metric comes online, all of those costs could double because Metric's not replacing the local system. It has to be on top of it. So we're doing track and trace with tags for every plant with 2 systems, 2 different computer systems, 2 different stamping or tagging systems. So then the last thing would just be...
Speaker, your time is up.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Speaker 1.
Yeah, hi, my name is Matt Scott, and I represent Humboldt's Finest, and we also have a centralized processing facility that's coming online here in Humboldt County. And I want to just, say that I absolutely respect that there's a track and trace program in place because we're banking on the end consumer paying the extra money for one reason, and that's because they're getting clean product. So this can help assure them that, and that's great. But I have a problem with the fact that I have a third-party vendor that is approved to work with Metric, and they're claiming right now that it takes one person per 1,000 plants, 8 hours a day for 21 days per cycle to use the Metric system. I don't know if that's 5% or 10% like the gentleman before explained, but it's a lot of labor. It's very expensive. I don't know how you're going to be able to do that. Plus, Metric is saying that you're going to get all your tags for free. Okay, great. Well, SIPCA here in Humboldt County is 8 cents per tag. So if we were to do a harvest that created 300,000 products, because that can easily happen with half-gram live resins, half-gram vape cartridges, that suddenly becomes quite a haul. Well, now all of a sudden, that's about a $25,000 fee just in SIPCA tags alone. Now you put Metric on top of that. Yeah, they say they want to integrate. Let's hope they do, because I don't see it happening, but they say they're trying to make it happen. That would be helpful. But it just becomes such a huge cost that I'm not quite sure the small farmer is going to make it and be able to pay all those costs. So I don't know how you address it, but I think it's good to put out on the table that these are what we're looking at. And I hope you guys can figure out a way. And sorry, I feel like I'm talking to him, but my back is to him, so I apologize.
Speaker 2.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming up here to Humboldt County. My name is Joe Mateer. I work with the City of Arcata, and we do have a local regulatory program. And my comment would be, how accessible is it for us to have access to the metric system on a local level? Is it just available to the law enforcement, or is it for like the planning, building, and engineering department as well? I'm also concerned about the waste that's being generated by this program, all the radio frequency items. That's going to end up in the landfill. The packaging already is an issue. Arcata, we try to strive for zero waste. I think the state of California is looking at that as well. So I believe that's a problem that we are going to have. And then I'm concerned about, we currently have a track and trace system that we tried to implement in the city, BioTrack, and it was wrought with problems from the get-go. Very little support for the users out in the cultivators, the manufacturers, and the retailers. And it was unusable for the city as well as us, trying to see and do the checks and balances. So, I'm just a little concerned about that. And then we're looking at on-site consumption, and I'm not sure how the track and trace system will work with that. If you go to a bar, a kind of a licensed regulatory element that you might have, you know, they're pouring out of a bottle and there's not that measuring. Are we again going to have each little unit that consumer is going to have at their booth? Is that going to be a unique package and require all this, again, generation of waste and labor? Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 3.
I also want to thank everybody for making the long drive up to the North Coast. And one of the big concerns I have is loss of internet access, or many of our production areas have zero internet access. So I'm not quite sure how this is supposed to work. I'm looking at the proposed regs on the BCC section. Section 5050, loss of access, reads, if at any point a licensee loses access to the track and trace system for any reason, the licensee shall prepare and maintain comprehensive records detailing all commercial cannabis activities that were conducted during the loss of access, which makes a lot of sense. And then a little further down, we get to, once access is restored, all commercial cannabis activity that occurred during the loss of access shall be entered into the track and trace system within 3 business days of access being restored. And then right under that is D. A licensee shall not transport, transfer, receive, or deliver any cannabis goods until such time as access is restored and all information recorded in the track and trace system. It's kind of contradictory, and is going to make for huge problems out in the hills right as this program's trying to get started. I think to provide some means of manual manifesting makes a lot of sense. And perhaps when a load leaves a farm with no internet access, and once it gets to a place with internet access, it could be downloaded, you know, or maybe at the receiver.
Thank you, Speaker. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 1.
Once again, I wanted to thank everybody for coming up. I know it's a long way. So real quick, just to reiterate some of the things that the previous speaker spoke about. There are 2 major ISPs in town. AT&T leases line from Suddenlink, so they're actually on the back end of it. So when one of those goes down, there are 2 direct lines up here. AT&T goes down day to 3 days at a time. Most rural areas are paying by the megabit or by the gigabit, so you have a lot of cost involved with that as well, just for uploads. Video upload, if you're uploading HD video, it would be astronomical. So on a different subject, one of the best ways to avoid cyber attacks is by keeping software and patches up to date. What are the processes for regulators and for third-party providers to create and ensure that any like 0-day vulnerabilities or emergency patches that might be put out by Metric might be, they need to be implemented immediately, right? There is a group that was using an outdated version of Drupal, and all those exploits are known. That's part of the thing. So if there's not a good job of updating those systems in a time-sensitive way, then that's going to be an extremely big problem. So also, it seems as though, because the regulators don't have any experience with this, that we're being beta testers. So as a function of that, are there beta testers? Are they being paid? Or is this something that's just being dumped with nobody having any idea what the actual implications or implementation processes are? And then we as the users are doing the testing and the feedback to the software process. Normally that's a function of the company, and I feel like that's our burden.
Speaker, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 2.
In following up about the reporting time, if you're in the regulations, it states that if your metric manager leaves, you have so much time. If we could coordinate that with the input time on that. The other concern that I really have is that since the cost of the tags is built into our license, My understanding the way state government works is that you have allotted a certain number of tags for that. In other words, you had a budget that was priced. What is to prevent the larger cultivators from accessing all of those tags and leaving the smaller cultivator out? I'm very concerned about that also. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 3.
Yeah, hello. I have a couple technical questions. One of them lies around the wet weight component of the track and trace. I'm still not understanding. He did explain that there is the ability to do partial harvest. However, because different cultivators with different practices create plants that are so various in sizes, I'm not clear on if you're still expected to wet weight the stems and stalks. If you're an outdoor seasonal cultivator, you can have rather large stems and stalks, and you might do partial harvest where you cut stems off. And the concern is really more around the data that's being collected from whatever they're required to do, and whether or not, if you take some data that assumes that you're going to get so much weight, wet weight or dry weight from stems and stalks, it might be skewed by the actual data that's getting received versus how they were to, say, take that data and apply any kind of enforcement or anything. And I'm not even clear on if we are supposed to weigh the stalks and stems, or if we can just weigh the flower or trim that you take off of there and then dry. Or I guess then you would do the wet weight after that. So there's some concerns around that. And then another thing someone mentioned earlier has to do with the rollout of using the track and trace and training that's accessible. I feel like there may or may not be, because I don't know, a reasonable amount of time for people to understand how to use the program. If they're only getting access upon getting their annual license and they don't have any kind of background as to, what the actual sizes of the stamps are or the tags are, how they have to design packaging around it, they have to design logistics around it with their businesses and the time that's involved in develop the infrastructure to do it. And we're really not even able to do that till we're either actually doing it or going through a training or some kind of informational period that gives us that information to be able to create our business models around it. So I am really concerned about training opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 1.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. Two quick things. One, if I heard him correctly, I thought I heard him say that there would be folks from Metric that would be coming out to the facilities and inspecting some of those track and trace systems. If I got that right, we would like to know, I know most of the people, whatever type of facilities they have, whether it's a grow, manufacturer, test lab, they're very tightly controlled. We're very concerned about who comes into the facilities. So we'd like to know if we're going to have folks from Metric coming out, as well as BCC, law enforcement. So that needs to be clearly stated, so we know who we're going to allow in. The second question I had was around APIs. It was brought up earlier, there's several track and trace systems out there. If you're fortunate enough to be in the Arcata area, you're able to have 3 different ones that you're dealing with. The county, the local BioTrack system for the city, as well as Metric when that comes up. So, and then also you're allowed to use someone like MJ Freeway or QuickBooks for your point of sale. So you're going to have to interface with that. So who will be responsible for writing the APIs for those? Is it going to be the individual owners of the whatever piece they have, whether it's a retail shop or a manufacturer? That can get quite expensive. I would encourage the state to work with the local communities to use one track and trace for everything. It would just make things so much easier. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, after the speakers who are at the table, we're going to move on to the next agenda item. There will be time for more public comment at the end, either on track and trace or on other issues.
Speaker 2, go ahead.
Is that next? Well, he got here before I did.
Yeah, so I had one more comment to make about the packaging. And, we were asked, well, we were mandated by the state that on July 1st, we have compliant packaging with all the requirements being met. And then, we were told that we were going to have to put the Metric label on the packaging so it could be track and traced. Well, then at that point we were told it would just be a 24-digit number, and then that could be applied in somehow. Now we're being told that it's an RFI thing that can be scanned, and there's a lot of companies that have put a lot of time and energy into developing their packaging so that they could have it ready on July 1st, compliant, and maybe that packaging is no longer compliant. It no longer works when you have to put a metric tag on the packaging. And we don't even know that right now because metric can't even give us the dimensions. So I think that's completely lack of responsibility on their end, asking us to do something that we did, and now we don't even know what we're supposed to do. So the only option is going to be to redesign very expensive, very time-consuming packaging that our company and many other companies, it may not work anymore. Like that tag, it may be too big. It may not fit anywhere on the packaging. And as Kristen alluded to earlier, the packaging looks like a NASCAR right now. It's just ridiculous how many different things have to go on it to make it compliant. Now we have a tag that we don't even know the dimensions. So again, we're just getting, hurt. I was hoping that he would be able to tell us today, oh, the dimensions are this. And then we could go home and see if it works or if we have to go back to the drawing board, but we can't even do that.
Hello, thank you. And thank you again for being a sounding board for this. I understand that this is a lot to take in, and thank you for being here in our home. I have a couple of comments about maybe the regulatory aspect of this. First of all, we have been talking about wet weight, which is in the proposed regular regulations, has not been seen anywhere previous to that, and is, as far as I understand, not in statute. So it is something that this committee could address in terms of making advisory comments back to regulating agencies to eliminate that requirement. I also have a question about the 60-day input window into the system and whether or not things could be put into storage that are unprocessed for further processing later. I'm wondering a little bit about the varieties, I guess going back to the wet weight, how different varieties of growing styles, especially in seasonal cultivators and long-term cultivators, there's anything from like a sea of green to a 14-foot plant, and what the goals of the data collection are and who owns that data as we move forward. So again, thank you for just being a sounding board for this. Also just wanted to express my own personal feelings about RFID, which you guys can look up or take it or leave it, but our radio frequency identifiers actually affect our pineal glands, which affects our melatonin and our sense of direction, and I have great concerns about putting that kind of technology into our mountains where we have actually CDFW coming to do inspections and have great impact on wildlife migration patterns actually. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the public comment. We are now going to move on to agenda item 3. Now this agenda item is for us to discuss and take possible action on the advisory committee's annual report, which I want to remind everybody on the committee that we are to, under statute, to publish a report on our activities of the past year by January 1st, 2019, which is not that far away. And we only have one meeting subsequent to this before then. I also want to make everyone on the committee aware that we have a number of committee members who have to leave around 4:30, several of who are also committee chairs, so get a sense of the overall time in terms of how much we want to discuss each thing. So under this agenda item, we're going to break it up into 3 parts. First, we're going to have reports from the subcommittee chairs that are going to give a brief synopsis of information from that subcommittee to be included in the annual report. Those should be, we have 10 subcommittees, so the report backs need to be fairly brief for us to get through. Even 5 minutes each will take us about an hour. We're then going to talk about selecting a subcommittee to help draft the report, a draft of the report in advance of the November meeting. That subcommittee will need to be not more than 2 people so that work can happen on the drafting outside of our meetings without us running afoul of the Bagley-Keene Act. So start thinking if you want one of those coveted subcommittee writing spots. And then lastly, we'll have a time for us to discuss any additional things we want to be considered as part of our written report that were not part of the presentations of the subcommittee that might be something in addition. Okay. So let's start with the subcommittee report backs with Ms. Nevedal first on the subcommittee on cultivators.
All right, thank you. I did just kind of compile a bunch of information from notes that I had taken and then meeting minutes. So we met twice.
Wait just 1 second for me to clarify. If the subcommittee chairs have written up comments, those can be submitted now to the committee, and how does that happen if they don't want to recreate everything but they've written?
Right, if they've written something that they want to be considered for the annual report, it can be provided. If there's copies, we can make it available to the public. If we don't have enough, then after the meeting, we have the ability to post that later. But if you do have anything written that you're going to want to give to the subcommittee for the drafting, you need to do that today at this meeting.
Well, it is not that together. So I just, it's really kind of an outline form. So if I could just kind of walk through kind of some of the highlights that I was hoping we could get into the cultivation. So as I was going through my notes, I noticed that we had made a number of recommendations as a cultivation subcommittee, and really out of all of the recommendations we had made, only 2 of those recommendations were deemed to be regulatory and not statutory, and so I would like to see the recommendations that we made that were statutory, that we couldn't as a CAC really discuss or vote on, be included in the report, because I also noticed that when I was looking at my notes, almost every page of notes that I had written out had reduced the barriers of entry on them. And then likewise, we had plenty of repeat notes and comments regarding allowing light deprivation in the outdoor category, and a number of let's see, I highlighted another one. A number of requests to kind of clean up the contiguous premise issue, which is forcing cultivators with multiple cultivation licenses on one parcel to obtain central processing licenses at the state, which are fairly costly, as well as nursery licenses at the state. Those, again, were largely statutory issues, so we weren't able to discuss them, but I do think in the spirit of the CAC wanting to put information forward to legislators, that getting them into the report is a great way to actually make that information public and then available for legislators to reference. So I think I could probably leave it at that for right now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Subcommittee on Distributors, Mr. Bulbian.
Yep. So on ours, just really the notes.
Oh, just 1 second.
Excuse me a
Ms.
minute.
Huffman has a quick question.
I have a process procedure question.
Yeah.
We're just accepting these and they're going in, no action required by us?
That's right. So the summary of what the subcommittees pulled together is based on the prior actions of the subcommittee that went to the full subcommittee, is my understanding. Correct me if I wasn't actually at the last meeting. So this is pulled together of the work that the subcommittee voted on and then was brought before the full committee and adopted. Some of those were broken down into recommendations that went to the rulemaking, and some were statutory. So I think that's a conversation for us to have, the third part, about whether we make those statutory change recommendations. This is put forth for subcommittees for information to be included in the full report. Then I think we need to, in the last part of this agenda section, have a conversation about whether we want to add to that or retract from that, or the guidance for that, so that the subcommittee that's formed in the drafting of the report can take that forward to the next and have a draft ready for our November meeting, which will be our last meeting we have before we have to publish the report in January. We'll have a chance then to look at the compiled draft of all the recommendations and have a conversation on the substance and decide as a committee whether things need to be added or taken out.
At the last meeting, there were a lot of discussion about some items had not been voted on by this committee. And were those items going to be included in the report? So I'm just trying to get clarification.
Okay, so that, I think, is for, let's have all the presentation, get through all the presentations, decide on the group to draft it, and then the last part of this discussion today will be on the substance, if there's things that we need to include or remove procedurally. Instead, I think if we go committee by committee, we're only going to get through 3 committees till we break till November. And then I would also add that I think a second opportunity we have to do that is when we come back in November and we have the information compiled in a draft, we can put on that agenda also substance questions about whether we need to add or remove certain topics. Okay, thank you.
So on the subcommittee for distribution, it's really a recap of our recommendations. Almost all of them, we were at 5-0. One of the recommendations was on selling samples. Recommendation was to allow for businesses to provide samples in both B&B and B2C situations. Bureau's response was that this would not run counter to what's in the existing regulations for samples being provided for a nominal fee. Second one was additional label, again 5-0. This was in addition to existing regs, distributors be,
I'm sorry, please slow down for the court reporter. Thank you.
Sure. So additional label, in addition to existing regulations, distributors to be allowed to apply an additional label to final products if the final product test was inconsistent with existing printed results. That was within the 10% range. Third recommendation was for distributors to be allowed off-site storage only facilities. That was again a 5-0 vote. Create subcategory designated as storage only that allows to hold inventory and transport only. Transactions would still fall under the main distribution license. Bureau response was that this would, there would be an issue with the dual licensing nature of the process and greater fiscal impact on the Bureau. Next recommendation was a transition period extension, again 5-0. Extends the transition period 12 months with the A&M being able to do business with each other. That was already extended indefinitely. And then we had one more change that was more statutory. That was multiple distribution hubs. Again, dual licensing will prevent that, and that was a statutory recommendation. So that's what we had on distribution.
The subcommittee on enforcement is Ms. Lynch. She's not here. Was there anyone else on the enforcement subcommittee who she talked to, or? Okay, no. So if there's not a report back, my understanding is that the work that the subcommittee already did and the notes from basically their initial recommendations and when the recommendations were brought in front of the full committee would be available to the drafters of the.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. All right, then, and similarly on the subcommittee on equity, Mr. Sweeney is not here. And I don't know if there was a conversation with someone else on the equity subcommittee following up about a report back. Okay, so similarly, we'll have to rely on the meeting notes of the equity subcommittee and the discussions of their recommendations with the full committee to proceed on that. Subcommittee on licensing applications, Ms. Yu.
Thank you. So we had 10 subcommittees that were established for the purposes of dividing up the Cannabis Advisory Committee's workload, and this subcommittee was tasked with developing recommendations for the state commercial cannabis licensing application. Most of our recommendations were regulatory, and many of them were included in the regulations, the permanent regulations package, and the emergency regulations as well. So the first recommendation that was adopted by the full committee was on the disclosure of owners, requiring applicant for an annual license who lists any corporation or other entity as an owner to also disclose the names of the owners or the corporation or other entity. The next recommendation was on annual fees, which recommended that the licensing authorities evaluate the amount of annual fees, especially fees paid by people with disabilities, military veterans, locally licensed equity applicants, and nonprofit compassion programs. The next committee the next recommendation that was passed by the full committee was to combine application and annual renewal fees for A&M licensees conducting the same business activities at the same licensed premises, and to extend the grace period until January 1st, 2020 under Section 5029, Subdivision B1. This was included in the regulations. And the final recommendation that was taken by the full committee was to allow the use of preparers. There were 2 recommendations from the subcommittee that were not adopted by the full committee, and I'm providing them for reference. One is on labor standards. Applicants should be required to submit a plan for compliance with labor standards and disclose previous labor law violations. The next one is on information from a corporation owner. The recommendation was to is that in the annual licensing application, if a corporation or other entity has a financial interest, the corporation or other entity must disclose the name, birth date, government-issued identification type, and numbers for all individuals who are the owners or owners of the corporation or other entity. These individuals shall not be required to submit the information required of owners under Section 5002C20.
Okay, thank you so much. Subcommittee on Manufacturers, Mr. Fair.
Yes, so the Subcommittee on Manufacturing conducted 2 meetings. Both meetings went over the time allowed, so it sounds like by earlier today I have a track record of chairing meetings that go beyond time. That said, there was a lot of interest, but most of the interest, again, was on issues that were statutory, including issues of waste and things of that nature. We did come up with 4 recommendations that we proposed to the full group, 3 of which were unanimously recommended. The first one was not unanimously recommended. 1 abstention was in that, and that was dealing with creating an illustrative guide for people to be able to, for packaging purposes. The other was to have package clarification. Again, a lot of the concerns that were raised here about now that there's an RFID tag, we were trying to be proactive to make sure that we didn't have redundancies in purchasing of packaging that ultimately wouldn't be utilized later. And the third was child-resistant packaging, because there was a lot of discussion between child-resistant and child-proof packaging. So we made a recommendation on that, and we made a recommendation on increasing the dosage limits on non-edible products from 2,000 to 4,000 milligrams and from 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams for non-edible adult use products. I would say what we have, but I think we are currently in the discussion process for the draft regular regs, so I do know that they took into account the BCC in their draft permanent regs, the comments of the committee. And so with that, I think that's probably our report.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So next is the Subcommittee on Micro Businesses. It's also Mr. Sweeney who's not present. Do you have, okay, go for it.
Me too.
Thank you, Ms. Stefano.
So the Microbusiness Subcommittee met twice, was along with the other subcommittees, and then again this morning, actually. Originally, we suggested 6 recommendations. Out of those 6, 4 of them ended up being statutory. The recommendations that we did bring to the full CAC included deferring security requirements to the local jurisdiction. That did not pass the CAC, unfortunately. And we did also make a recommendation that in an effort to create an on-ramp to legalization, there should be a clarification of microbusinesses that includes tiers based on gross receipts and number of employees. The fee schedule should be redefined to include a ceiling that delineates when the business is no longer considered a microbusiness, and incentives should be provided based on equity for compassion use and rural operators. That did pass CAC, and I would say probably is pending some further action. Additional recommendations that were statutory included items such as the ability of sales to be conducted on a temporary basis, such as in farm stands, the single premise issue, clarification of qualifying activities, the ability to operate on non-contiguous premise is the last one.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nevedal. Let's see, Dr. Cermak on the Committee on Public Health and Youth.
The Public Health Subcommittee met twice and felt that that was not really adequate time for all that we needed to be discussing, and we
suggested that we remain as a standing committee, but no action has been taken on that. Virtually all of our recommendations were deemed to be statutory. The ones that were accepted had to do with first recommendation being proper identification training in order to minimize sales to underage customers. A variety of remedies were adopted for the burden put on compassionate medical cannabis dispensaries, including possibility of developing a separate license or reducing the taxes, if possible, for compassionate medical cannabis dispensaries. There was a recommendation to clarify branded vehicles, trucks that would potentially be driving through past schools and through areas where advertising is not permitted. We emphasize the need to monitor health claim advertising for adult use cannabis. We recommended that data be collected on particularly emergency room and unintended overdose incidences. We suggested that the advertising, the age-specific advertising, that the percentage audience be raised, and there were a couple of recommendations that there was not time to be discussing directly with the committee as a whole, so I'll submit that in those additional ones in writing so they at least get to be included in the report.
I'm going to recommend that you may want to mention those now because anything that's going to be submitted would need to be done at a board meeting, because if you have a subcommittee of 2, once you have that third person entering the conversation, you do run into some Bagley-Keene issues.
I would need to pull up a different file, and that takes me a little bit of time, so if you allow me to do that
we can come back to you after the other 2. Okay, but just to clarify, the subcommittees that aren't reporting back, obviously what's in the minutes from prior committee meetings can be incorporated.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, subcommittee on retailers. Mr. Dombrowski's not here. Is there someone else on the subcommittee of retailers, or we'll just go based on the minutes? Okay. And Ms. Jacobson on subcommittee on testing labs.
So the subcommittee on testing laboratories made 4 recommendations, and none of the 4 recommendations were addressed in the proposed regulations. I would like to make sure that those are still included in the annual report. And I would move to, so if I want to make a motion for something to be included, I have to do it now?
Well, you could do it today at this meeting. That could also be done at the next meeting, which I would assume you're planning to have a draft of the report for the next meeting for consideration by the full committee.
Yeah, I guess my thought was that today we would have a discussion about, well, that what would be committed, what would be included in the draft for the report for our next meeting would be based on the actions that the subcommittees have already taken and the actions of the committee as a whole in adopting them. And then we have a conversation about other areas that we want to include of information, categories of information. And I guess we would probably have to have a motion on that, the third part of this conversation about do we want to include X categories of information or not. And
I'm
then
confused.
at our meeting in November, we'll have the substance of what's in the draft. But
So we discussed these lab testing requirements, and none of them were addressed by the regulations. And so that, I don't find that satisfactory, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to present to the BCC something very concrete that they can address before November. Is now the time to do that?
So wait, let me just ask a clarifying question. Were the 4 recommendations adopted by the full committee, or were they just recommendations of the subcommittee?
Yes, they were adopted by the full committee.
Okay. So my assumption would be we would put them in the report that say the full advisory committee recommended these 4 changes in the area of testing, and none of them were adopted in the permanent rules. And that would be part of our report, because we have to report on what actions the subcommittee took, and then whether the licensing authorities, whether they adopted any of those recommendations. So that's what I would think in terms of the report. And then maybe there's a separate question about whether we want a different action aside from the report to recommend to the licensing authorities that they do something else. Is there something else for the report that you think? Okay.
Yes. I think it's really important to include a recommendation that at the very least, standard cannabinoid reference standards are used that are commercially available.
But is that something that the advisory committee already has recommended?
No.
It's a different.
Yes. And this is based on none of the 4 testing recommendations being adopted by the new regulations. This is something that they could easily address if we brought it up now. If we wait until November, it won't be addressable.
Just a legal clarification, yeah. On your agenda today is to talk about what's going to be included in the annual report. So additional recommendations outside of what's going in the annual report would not be properly agendized for today's meeting.
Okay, so that can be a future agenda item?
At the end, we should put it on the agenda for November, but
Okay, then I have
is there
nothing
any way
to
to
add.
address it prior to November?
Question. The part of the agenda, other recommendations that we're talking about, are they not appropriate to discuss today?
I think they are, but in terms of the report. So other areas of recommendations are things that we want to put in the report, but not separate recommendations to the licensing authorities apart from what we would recommend in the report. I mean, we could, I think, under that third category, vote on that as an issue, whether we want to include that in the report, but not as like a separate recommendation now to the licensing authorities. Is that correct?
Okay. Yes, you're correct.
Tamara, but I have a question since we're kind of on this subject is, we actually had a subcommittee meeting today. We've never had a chance to present the recommendation motions that were passed to the full committee. I know that Kristen didn't reference the 2 motions that we made, but it might be important that you make a reference that the committee made, because they're legitimately made by the committee, but have not had a chance to be brought forward to the full committee, and that could be addressed in it. Do you want that now or at some other later time? Because that's part of the report of the committee.
I think we should do that today as part of the agenda item C, 3C, as long as we talk about it in terms of things we want to add to the report. So to our subcommittee, we want to add this issue, maybe the lab one as well, like we want to add that on to the report, but it's in the context of what we're going to put in the draft report for November, not. So, Dr. Cermak.
It's my understanding that last meeting I put on the agenda for future meetings the ability for us to hear what the subcommittee was going to be coming up with today. So that was put on the agenda at last meeting.
So the future agenda items that you give at the next meeting, those are information that goes to the chair that he takes, and then based on all the recommendations and the time frame for the meeting and deadlines and whatnot, he then determines what would be on the agenda for each particular meeting.
Right. I mean, I do think under the subcommittee reports, it's a synopsis of what that subcommittee thinks should be included in the annual report. So it could be part of that report.
So another procedural question. This morning in the subcommittee meeting on microbusiness, we discussed at length about a potential statutory recommendation and we ran out of time. We were not able to reach, I think, a consensus on what to recommend, and I think we might want to take up some additional issues. Procedurally, if we wanted to get those into the annual report, would that subcommittee have to meet again between now and November in order to take on and vote on some formal recommendation, which could then go to the full committee, or is there some other process?
Sure, then I have an idea as well.
Sure. So today you're talking about what the committees recommend be included in the report. So you could say that you could bring up the fact that the committee the Microbusiness Committee came up with these additional recommendations and would like to see them in that report. They wouldn't necessarily, unless the whole committee would vote to say, yes, we want to adopt those as the recommendation and and be in the report, they wouldn't necessarily have been adopted by the full committee at this time, but you certainly can put them as information that you want included in the annual report.
Yeah, now the problem is actually worse than that because they haven't even been adopted by the subcommittee at this point.
But let me just ask a question. Procedurally, there's no reason why something has to be adopted by the subcommittee before it comes to the full committee. So if there were like remaining items that we wanted included in the annual report, in theory, we could put some of those on the agenda item for November when we have a draft of the report and say final business, we want included in the annual report some of these things, and just not vote on it directly from the full committee.
The downside to that, of course, is that we'd have to get consensus by, how many of us,
Well, but what if it doesn't come as a recommendation from the subcommittee, it's just talked about in the full committee and we vote on it? Is that possible?
Right, you do have that provision to talk about what you want in your annual report. So.
Okay.
May I ask one clarifying question?
Sure.
So going first is always hard, so I kind of like blew through the cultivation recommendations.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that even though I didn't verbally read all 9 statutory requirements, that we still have the ability to include those because they are accounted for in the meeting minutes, and I did reference that I thought it was important to include those. Is that, I just want to verify that that's the
I think
case.
so. I mean, I think how I read the statutory language of the annual report is that we're reporting back on everything the committee did, and then we can say whether the agencies did something or not. We can say the agency's response was they couldn't act on this because it was statutory, but we recommended it anyway. Correct? Okay, were you done with that? Okay, Ms. Huffman.
Madam Chair, I'm not representing a subcommittee. At the last meeting, I indicated that there were certain items that I thought this committee should address that didn't come from a subcommittee, but have to do with the overall functioning, overregulation, and concerns about who's on first trying to get this job done. Where will I get a chance?
You're going to get a chance to talk about that in just a minute. I've been asked that we take a quick bathroom break. Then when we come back, we have item B, which is choosing our 2-person subcommittee to draft. And then item C is when we're going to talk about other things outside of the subcommittee report backs that we want included in that first draft of the report.
Thank you.
Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so. Oh. Right. And Dr. Cermak, are you ready, or do you want to come back with your remaining things after the 10-minute break? After the 10-minute break. Okay, great. So 10 minutes, right?
But we're not presented to the committee as a whole, and just to read those into the record. The first is a recommendation that the Department of Public Health designate sufficient resources to launch education, youth education and prevention programs related to cannabis. The second is that the 3 regulatory agencies develop a culturally competent, multilingual public information campaign about the means for lodging complaints about inaccurate advertising, particularly as related to health claims related to adult use marijuana. And that the third one was that all state and local licensing agencies coordinate better for the purpose of closing unlicensed and unregulated cannabis businesses that make it difficult for the licensed businesses to succeed. We felt that was a public health issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's move on to B, which is the discussion of selecting members to draft our annual report, the first draft of which would be presented for us to discuss the content and comments on at the November meeting. So, and as I mentioned, it has to be a committee of just 2 so that there can be substantive work that happens before our November meeting. Are there committee members who are interested in being on the writing subcommittee? Okay, thank you,
I'll
Ms.
step-
Nevedal. Oh, and Miss Yu. And Avis, yeah, I can believe it. Okay, anyone else who's interested? So we have 3 folks who are interested in doing it. Should we proceed with a nomination of 2?
I can bow. I'll bow.
Okay.
I would, are we held to the 2, or can we have 3
We
people?
have to be held to the 2 if they want to
Oh,
be able
because
to
we
do
have to have a
substantive
meeting,
work
right,
outside. I mean,
Right.
absent Bagley Keene, it would be wonderful to have 3, but we can't, it will be a meeting. Okay, Ms. Nevedal and Ms. Yu? Okay, and I believe we don't have to take a vote on it, is that correct? Because we can appoint them? Okay. Great, thank you. So then we can move on to the third part of the agenda, which I can tell we're chomping at the bit to discuss, which is aside from the actions that the subcommittees have taken and those recommendations.
Madam Chair?
I'm sorry,
Did
what?
you appoint somebody? You talk faster than my...
Oh, I'm sorry. So I'm sorry for not clarifying. So on the writing subcommittee, it's going to be Ms. Nevedal and Ms. Yu.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for volunteering, and thank you for stepping back and letting us move forward. We don't have to vote on it because the chair can appoint. We could either vote on it or the chair can appoint. So I'm going to appoint. Let's do. Okay. So the third part of this agenda, item C, is for us to discuss additional things and content for the annual report outside of the actions that the subcommittee have already taken on and the committee, which were just summarized. And also, I think it says in addition to what's statutorily required, which under statutes are required that we publish the annual report describing our activities, including recommendations that we made and the response of the licensing authorities. So now I'm opening it up for discussion as to other things, content of the report.
So this is Catherine Jacobson. I have one item I would like to include in the report, and it's fairly simple and straightforward. One of the recommendations we made to the BCC was to put in place standard operating procedures for analytical methods used in testing labs. And they pointed out that it will take them a significant amount of time and money to do this, and that's completely understandable. One thing they could address easily is just the requirement to use commercially available reference standards. Does everyone understand what that means? So when a testing lab, right now, testing labs create their own proprietary reference standards. That means they extract and purify cannabinoids, and then they determine themselves what the concentration is of their reference solutions, and then they measure the items that come in for testing against that reference solution. So if everyone is using a different reference solution, then there's no way that the testing is going to be standardized from lab to lab. So I'm suggesting that we include requirements so that that reference solution, which is commercially available without a DEA license, they're DEA exempt solutions because they are so dilute that they represent no, and they're in methanol, so you can't actually ingest them. So they're DEA exempt, they're commercially available, they're always the same standard. So I would move that we as a committee ask BCC to include in their testing regulations that all testing labs use commercially available standardized reference standards.
Second.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Can we move to make that recommendation as a committee now, or are we limited to moving that we include that as a recommendation in our report?
Technically, you'd want to make it's my understanding that her motion is recommending that be included in the report.
So I am still confused as to the procedure. I just want to back up for a minute and clarify what I think we're doing is that we've got the statutorily required items, which consist of our recommendations to the BCC, right? Which are all, by definition, regulatory items, right? and not statutory items because that's what we voted on as a committee?
Yeah, well, my understanding, and Tamara, correct me if I'm wrong, is that in our report, we actually summarize all the activities of the committee. That's what's required by statute. So to me, that means it could be our regulatory recommendations. It also includes our statutory recommendations. It also includes presentations we've had and other issues we've raised. It says in the statute that we shall publish an annual report describing our activities, but not limited to the recommendations of the advisory committee to the licensing authorities.
Okay, so all the statutory recommendations that the individual subcommittees have approved and have gone to the full committee, those are all within, we've already taken care of that. That's within the bounds of what's going in the report.
That's in the activities that we did in the last year, so I think it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was the case before we went on and started addressing new substantive, like.
Right.
Okay.
I just want to say, so the motion's been seconded, so I'm going to open up to discussion for a second. Just in terms of procedure and like an overall time check on where we are in danger of losing quorum in an hour at 4:30. And we want to allow time for public comment on the agenda item 2. And we also want to talk about setting agenda items for our next meeting in November. So we can move forward on some items to vote to add them if we didn't act on them. I think we can also think about adding some of those items to the November meeting agenda when we have time and we have the draft report. I think it will still allow us time to take additional actions that we add to it. So I want to put that out there in terms of overall time. I'm a little concerned. Yes.
I want to call Robert Rules to your attention. We have a quorum, and unless there's someone hostile that calls for a quorum call, once you've established a quorum, you can continue to do your work.
Right. Yes. Let's continue. I don't want to not do the work, but I just want us to be conscious of the time we have.
The quorum call should not be a reason to rush through if we have items to discuss. Unless somebody is hostile and want to do a quorum call, then we have to take the vote and.
Right. Okay. I understand. Okay. I just want to have a chance for us not to run out of an opportunity to address some important items that we need to at least get on the agenda for the November meeting, just because of the reality of what might happen in an hour. But okay, there's a motion on the table that's been seconded, and I will open up for discussion.
Can we just rehear the motion because we kind of went through a bunch of other things between then and now?
Yes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Can you restate your motion?
I make a motion to recommend to the BCC in our annual report to require testing labs to use commercially available standardized cannabinoid reference standards.
This is really standard of almost any industry and really needs to be part and parcel of the Bureau's activities.
Other comments? Okay, if there's no other questions or comments from the committee, I'll open it to public comment on this one motion.
This has been a long time coming. It should have been part of the original to standardize all the way across, so we didn't have this problem. I'm amazed that we've gone this far without it ever being raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead, Speaker 3.
I'd like to see you take it just a little bit further than that. Insist that that a standard be used, and insist that that standard be consistent across all test labs, whether it be Sigma Aldrich or Cayman. I would like to see one standard for everyone, so we're all using the same thing, and it's consistent across the board. We are seeing results that are way out of whack right now. I've had people give me product that they purchased that was in the 30% range for bud, and we'll test it, and it's below 20. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker 1.
So one of the things that the state of Washington and the public data that they have has shown is that potency is both a motivating factor for purchase and also a motivating factor for going to different labs. So as a form of market share, that affects how labs do. So that's probably one of the reasons people do it. So there is an ISO requirement for reference laboratories. I think anybody who is producing a reference standard should be required to have that. And I'm just truly disheartened that none of the lab recommendations were adopted. That's a huge bottleneck in this industry, and the fact that we're not moving forward with any of the processes to deal with that is really sad. So we need to fix that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move to a vote.
Boboian,
Aye.
Cermak,
Aye.
Clifford,
Aye.
Farrow,
Aye.
Heidelbach Terremoto,
Aye.
Harada, Huffman, Jacobson, Leff,
Aye.
Nevedal,
Aye.
Nikita,
Aye.
Peck,
Aye.
Stevenson,
Aye.
Todd,
There we go.
Oops. Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Woolsey,
Aye.
you.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, unanimous vote. Okay, so back to C of discussion of other items for inclusion in the annual report.
Chair, I'd like to yield to any subcommittee chair who has something before I open up my global issues.
Okay, then Ms. Nevedal. Oh, okay. She has a comment, but it's not subcommittee related, so she's going back to you. Ms. Huffman.
I spoke at the last meeting regarding that we are officially the committee that should provide feedback, not only regulatory, but to legislators to try to get change in this industry that we think is necessary. I don't think we can duck the issue that it's kind of getting overregulated. Just the conversation that we heard today is mind-boggling about what people have to go through to function with tagging and all, but that's not the only area that's overregulated. I also think that it's disjointed. There are too many cooks, Willie Brown said this once and got in trouble, in the kitchen because everybody doesn't know what the other person's doing. Like, did they have hearings, and did we get to go to the hearings on some of the other departments that are regulating this industry? And we just can't ignore the fact that we got so many different entities making policy and regulations that it's going to kill the initial drive to have a flourishing cannabis industry in California. And I think, thank you. I think the people who are regulating used to remind me a little bit of my mom. She had 18 kids, and if one did something bad, she'd whip them all. And I think that there's a situation here where they're treating everybody like they would be. I know there's stuff in the initiative that calls for certain things, but you can go over the top implementing those things and structuring the regulations. And I think we're obligated to point out the fact that the Bureau has very little authority over certain aspects of this, but people come here expecting us to have the answers and that we can do something that even as bright as she is, the commissioner, Ajax, can't get it done because it's outside her purview to get it done. So I don't think we should come all this time, all my money, all the way from, I came all the way up here from Sacramento to make this speech today. Left at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I want us to deal with the fact that we are the only entity in California who can talk about some global issues that's killing this industry. The people that I was interested in, I say this every time, so you all probably don't believe it. Never smoked a joint, never held a joint, don't want a joint, not in for use. You want to use it? Use it. That's not my issue. My issue was to create an environment so we could reduce the underground market. Y'all call it black market, I call it underground market. We could reduce that underground market, get violence out of my community, and give some of those people who have been harmed by the war on drugs in this industry and lost their ability to function legally in society, give them some redress, give them a piece of this business, give them an opportunity to feel like they weren't completely overlooked again. I said, somebody asked me about the lieutenant governor, who was very involved, And I told him the other day, we were in a meeting, and we were talking about economic development. I said, well, I don't want it to be like the cannabis issue, because the cannabis issue, one more time, has bypassed the people who suffered the most to bring it into fruition, and also bypassed the people who have been underground. Underground market is flourishing, from what I hear. I don't know how to gauge that, but I got relatives that tell me they'll never come into, who's got a clinic, and buy something from your clinic, whoever has recreation or medicinal, because they can still get it on the streets cheaper than they can with all of our regulations. So is this group of bright people, all of us representing different aspects of the industry, willing to make some concrete, I don't care if they don't take the recommendations, are we willing to make them? And then we can do with them whatever we can't get done. But I think people are counting on us to say something. They come, they spend their money, they follow us all across the state, even to places that I didn't think they'd show up. I see some of the same people over and over trying to make their points. Don't we represent them? I don't represent the industry per se. I represent the people, the industry, the bureaucracy. Even Ms. Ajax is a person. She might be the chief, but these are all people trying to make something work on behalf of the state of California. I think it's a failure. I'm not a doomsday person. I'm very optimistic, but you cannot sit here and listen to all these regulations, ask all these questions, and then not say there's something that we need to adjust, whether we can fix it or not. So I want to recommend, I gave the recommendations the last time. I left home too soon, didn't bring my paper, but I had about 5 things. One of them is that, and I don't know if I should make a motion. You're not supposed to speak, you make a motion, but you can tell me. I can let somebody else speak and I can get the microphone again, because I need to make 5 motions. One is that we address the overregulation, the overtaxation, the lack of coordination between the agencies, too many agencies that are making independent decisions without talking to each other. I'm not saying they're not talking to each other, but they sure as hell ain't talking to me and us. They're just doing what they want to do, and then we are victims trying to answer. So I'd like to talk about that. I'd like to talk about the fact that equity has escaped us. For the people, Tamara, you were part of the writing. You know that part of what we want to do was bring social redress. There's no social redress in this industry. Even the agriculture people up here that have been abused in many instances, arrested in many instances, they don't even have social redress out of it. We are over-regulating every aspect of this industry. Those would be my 4 motions that I would want to make. And then maybe the 5th one would be to ask some bold member of the legislature to engage these recommendations in a piece of legislation so we could have all the people who are benefiting and who should have something to say about it, go through a legislative process to see what we can get done. And then I am ready to get those same guys, those wealthy guys who put this on the ballot the first time, to come and make some changes on the ballot if that's what we have to do. But we cannot do nothing. We're killing the industry. This is my speech for today, all the way from Sacramento. Thank you. Do I need to make a motion? Second my motion.
I'll second. Oh, you're too quick to the button. Who seconded it?
Thank you. We
I
got 2
second
seconds.
the motion.
Okay. Can you state the motion again before we discuss? Because, well, not the whole thing, but I'm unclear at the beginning. You said you're moving that we address these issues, or are you moving that we address, that the committee address them at some point, or that we make a statement about them? I'm unclear about what comes out of the motion. Like that we want to address it in November, or we want to make a statement now?
I wanted something in
the for the report. It has
for
to
the
be
report.
Yeah.
It's for the report.
Okay.
I want something in the report that indicates that we are over-regulating this industry. Okay, now, do I have to go get some evidence, or we've had it all year? I want something in the report that there are too many people who are making regulations, too many bureaucracies involved, and that there's a disconnect between local government and state that needs to be addressed. So I'd like to have that as a part of it. I'd like to have as a part of it that the whole social equity piece has been lost. I'd like to have a part of it that the growers who suffered the most are being penalized the most with that we're overtaxed, and that needs to be looked at. And they're being burdened with, I can't say what I started to say. I take that back. I was going to say if I were a grower, but I'm not. But I think they have a very difficult road. And then the last piece I wanted to make was that we ask in our report that there be a legislative oversight and a piece of legislation to address some of these so that all the people who know more about this industry than I do can go through a legislative process and make their issues known or object to what we're proposing. So it's more like a global review that might not be in our purview, but I'm one of those that you take the authority. They gave us a committee, they gave us staff, they asked us to do something, so we have the authority. They don't have to take it, but we have the authority to say what we want to say, so that's my motion.
Okay, and it's been seconded.
I'll second, but I have a question. With the writing committee, since we have a writing committee for drafting the final version, which is going to be presented at the November event, and what Ms. Huffman's touching on, it's very broad and very specific at the same time. Do we have the authority to have a second writing committee set up that provides a report on everything that Ms. Huffman talked about, presented at the November event, and have that included with the report that's being done as the formal report? It's not going to be out until January anyway. This way it keeps a lot more focus on the specific topics.
So I guess the question is, could there be a second writing committee that deals with global issues?
Right.
In addition to one that deals with specific, Tamara?
Yeah, as long as they're dealing with separate issues and they're not communicating with one another in violation of Bagley-Keene, you could set up a subcommittee to particularly make recommendations on these issues that are included in Ms. Huffman's motion if you chose.
Okay. I guess I'll ask Ms. Huffman, we can either just proceed on talking about your motion, or would you want to amend it to establish this, or we don't need a motion to establish subcommittee? We could vote on including that, and then we could just establish
Yeah, you could do that. The chair can establish.
So
Okay.
can we leave the motion so
Yeah,
it's
so let's
discussed?
do the motion to talk about whether we want to have those global statements that Ms. Huffman outlined, and then we'll talk about the process. Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Sermai.
I'd like to make a friendly amendment to that, Alice, and it's just to include the fact that the intention of Prop 64 to set it up so that the small growers, the small farmers, are going to have some lead time before the larger part of the industry can get started has not succeeded. It does not appear to have succeeded. And I think that's one of the things that needs to be addressed.
Other comments on the motion? Or, I'll just make a statement, sorry, and then I'll get I like the idea of it. I want to support it. The only thing that concerns me a little bit is whether there's nuance in there, because, it's one thing to say, like, as a general concept, overregulation is bad, but then at the same time, I feel like some of the regulations are really crucially important that they exist. And on the one hand, taxation at a certain point is bad if people don't engage in it, but on the other hand, the tax revenues are going to really important projects in the state that I want to make sure the environmental cleanup's funded, and there's investment in communities that are most harmed by the war on drugs. So I like the idea of some global framing of issues. I'm nervous, I think there's a lot of important nuance there in terms of what I feel when I feel taxation is important and regulation is important, and sometimes when it's not.
Madam Chair, nothing in my motion said that taxation is bad. I said over. Nothing in my motion said regulation is bad. I said over, which means that we know we got to have regulations. We know we got to have taxation. We know we have to have the things that we have. But there's a point where we need to assess, too many entities in there, and are we killing the industry? So I'm not speaking to bad, because it costs money to regulate and to make it legal and to keep it safe and so forth. But I don't know how far we should go in policing this industry and regulating this industry and killing this industry. And so that's my concern. So whoever wants to do the nuance in the writing, I'm really happy. I could even go home and write out my stuff and send it in so the writers can know what I'm talking about, and they can take it and do with it what they want.
Unfortunately, Bagley-Keene kind of comes into play there.
If I write it?
If you were to write it,
if you're on the
one of committee of two,
it would be three.
We'd be three, unfortunately.
Mr. Nikita, did you have a?
It's actually, Kristen had her light on.
Just.
Okay, can you hear me? No, I just wanted to, I mean, the vice chair just said what I was going to say, essentially that I think identifying global issues that have come up over and over again without the specifics of what we're talking about is too broad for me to really get behind. So I would like to see what it says before I'm committed to vote for it. So I would support a motion that directs a write-up to be presented, but I'm not prepared to support something going into the report without seeing the report itself. And I'm not sure that's what we're voting on today. I'm just looking for clarity on that.
Well, to make a couple of comments, one of the things that we have to recognize is that this subcommittee doesn't end in November with the next meeting. It is going to continue until next year and move forward. So this is just the beginning. The recommendations that are being written and presented at the November session, that's the actual report that's going to go out in January. What we're discussing is the global issues beyond the recommendations that are going to be part of the report, and those are global issues that do need to be raised so that this effort can continue into the next year. And the next year when we do reconvene, or the new committee reconvenes, that there's a much narrower focus on the broader issues, be it taxation, be it local and state implementation, stuff like that. So at least when we start the new year, we have a starting point. As far as what gets drafted being included in the report, that would be drafted separate from the actual document that would be presented and that would be submitted as the annual report. And when it's presented in November, at that time, everybody will have an understanding of what the general concerns are that do get raised. And then at that time, we'd be able to vote on it to include it as part of the report as a continuation of next year's efforts.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I have a slight different take than what you had. I think everybody's right. Nobody wants to vote for something that they haven't seen the language. So I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting that we make an effort of putting some concrete suggestions in the report. I'm speaking to the report, not next year. Legislature starts this year. While we're talking, they're up getting stuff done. So I'm suggesting that we put some concrete stuff in the report, not that we'll get it all done this year, but the report will reflect this committee's best thinking. And I think the writers, whoever want to write it, I'll write with somebody friendly, but I won't write with anybody you want to. I need a friendly partner. I mean, it's just a matter of bringing something back in November that people can see that we're not off on some kind of let's, kill taxes and revenue and let's stop testing and let's stop all that. We are talking about sensible people putting sensible ideas on paper to get sensible changes that will help this industry flourish. That's all I'm talking
Okay,
about.
so my understanding of the motion, it's that we include these issues in the report, but that a draft would be put before the committee in November, and then we would talk and vote on the substance of it and whether it's included. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Clifford.
I think it's the right approach. I'm too very concerned that something go into November's report and we not wait a year. I think it's really important the committee get on record, now before the legislature meets about these issues. I would urge us to go broad, which I think will make it easier for a lot of us to kind of sign on board. A general sense of the committee that we're concerned about the regulatory burden. In the aggregate, it appears to be too high, without having to pick and choose any particular areas where it might,
be deficient even in some areas.
It might be deficient, but I think we should try to see if we can agree in a general sense that the burden itself is too high, and it's a really important issue because it pushes the underground market, and that's a big deal for equity. It's a big deal for environmental things. I mean, so that the same with the tax burden. I mean, I'm not prepared to sign on to something saying the tax burden is too high, but we're certainly concerned about hitting the sweet spot where we're not enabling the underground market at the same time preserving revenue. So.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, Ms. Nevedon?
So just real quick, I do think that there's a place where this can kind of create an overarching theme, right? We'll have, I would imagine, kind of a lead-in and a body to the report, and then substance as around what kind of recommendations, both regulatory and statutory, that have been made. And I do feel like when I looked back on notes,
save a lot of paper, right? So I've saved everything from these meetings. So when I was looking back on it, I feel like Ms. Huffman's requests here have been repeated over and over and over again. I noticed them not just in the full CAC context, but for example, when we were discussing micro businesses, there was, in that subcommittee, there was a lot of questions about equity and a lot of notes about equity, a lot of notes about compassion, a lot of notes about how taxation would work. Like, how are we going to have compassion programs with this cultivation tax? So I think, I mean, how I'm kind of looking at this motion is there's this desire to capture this kind of ongoing dialogue that we've been having, and I think it could easily kind of get tucked into an overarching, like, introduction to the report, and I did take a bunch of notes. I'm a note taker. So,
yeah, I would say that it's probably a spirit document, to the point of, there's a spirit of, I am reluctant to say that there's over anything or under anything. I'm more of a person that says that there appears to be maybe not the right regulation yet, that there might not be the right taxation yet. There may not be, and we can point to areas within those systems that give us that reason to say that. And the same with, I mean, we can't do it, I know people hate to say it, but enforcement. A lot of these people who are trying to do the right thing are competing against people who aren't paying the taxes, aren't doing the testing, all those things, and we've got to do a better job. We really do have to do a better job of those people who are not and have no intention of ever following the regulations, whether they be more or less, because that is harming all of those people who want to do the right thing and making it almost impossible for them to compete. And so, and I think the environmental piece is a really important piece, and I think the equity piece is a very important piece. And we did a lot of discussion today about the micro business and trying to look at, the small farmers. So your thing about making sure that the people who began this and have the legacy in this are able to compete. And so I don't know if the motions that we made are necessary to add if this global argument encaptures that. Because, we had discussions about why isn't the Department of Health here and why isn't the Department of Ag when components of micro business are defined based upon the standards they set for standalone agriculture and standalone manufacturing. And so those are comments I think that really need to be captured by this committee, as well as, even though we are under the purview of the Bureau of Cannabis Control, the reality that as long as we have multiple agencies, then they need to engage and be equally participating at these events so we can produce the best recommendations possible so this industry has the best chance of success, and those that invest and the workers who toil in it have a chance to grow with it. And I mean, I'm always a worker frame guy, and so, every time we talk about the employer, I'm looking at, if the industry loses the ability to track and trace and they have to shut down until then, how many workers are the ones who are not going to collect the paycheck for that day? How many are not going to be able to, or are going to be stuck at home? And yes, it's a beautiful day today, but I'm sure they have bills to pay. So I mean, these are the things, my being here, are important, and I don't know that we're addressing a lot of that. There should be a backup in case it goes down, so that way we don't lose that production of real GDP here for our state, because workers are a piece of that too. So, thanks.
Chair, I'm going to ask you to. I guess you got speakers. I was going to say call roll, but I want to make one last statement. We have listened to the citizens of this industry across the state. If we don't know what the problems are, we haven't been listening. And so I'm not suggesting that we take hard, I am suggesting that we raise these issues as a possibility and get someone to address them in legislation. Everybody can come up and say, that regulation we like, that regulation we don't. That's what you do in legislation. People get a chance to speak out, and it's done in a way that when you get through, you haven't wasted your time if you can get the legislation out. So I'm not asking for anything crazy here. I'm just asking for us to be responsible to our constituents.
Okay. And just before we call the question, Dr. Cermak had made a friendly amendment about small farmers.
Oh, you accepted it?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Second. Did the second accept it? Who was the second?
Davis.
Oh,
There we go.
yes. Okay. Then we will move to public comment.
Paul Hansberry, pardon me in advance if my frustration shows. Susan and I have been to just about every meeting from the Blue Ribbon Commission and even before that in Mendocino County. We were told by and large, by the people that were tasked with making the regulations, that they didn't know anything about the industry. And they wanted us to give feedback so they could learn about the industry. Then they hired consultants to develop these SRIAs. We met with a few of those people. They didn't know much more, but they were out there collecting statistics so they could put the statistics together in their SRIA. The Bureau was tasked with formulating regulations and guidelines for an existing industry, not the other way around. They weren't tasked with formulating regulations to create an industry. The industry was created with the small farmers, and they've been neglected and forced out. We're missing a season right now. So the other thing I wanted to say is that with this broad body of the Regulatory Commission, you don't have to have all of this with the different departments. This is one body where we can make comments, public comments that would reach everything that's impacting us, not just your division or your department or this branch of that division. You're making recommendations to the entire industry. I think that the interpretations based on these SRIAs and the consultants, that the interpretations of the statute are strong and steadfast. The reason for the public comment, and I believe the reason for this advisory committee, is to make recommendations as these regulations, as the metamorphosis of these regulations come out. They need to possibly look at the interpretations and say, oh, well, maybe we should look at it this way, and not stand fast to their original interpretations of the statute. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 3.
Thank you all again. It's pretty easy to look back and see the initial meetings that I came in this room, the room was packed. Today there's more committee members from the state that have never been involved in cannabis, more than likely, than there are people in the audience. Right now you have the proverbial regulatory boot on the throat of all the industry operatives, especially in communities like ours up here. Disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, disadvantaged communities, thresholds for equitable participation in this new regulated industry is, as you can see, there's no excitement in this room. There's not a lot of people in this room. Micro business should have had a massive amount of people in this room this morning to discuss that. The solutions are available. However, the state is over-regulating everything. You've taken every single line item of this industry, from your interviews, from the SRIAs, all of this, and you've regulated every single line item of activity in this industry, down to who gave you $20 to take a taxi to go to a meeting. And at this point in the game, what you have to realize is in 2 years from now, when an operative is out there working and a regulatory person comes to that site, and they look and they say, oh, well, you know, you didn't put the water in this particular bucket today. And yeah, you know, but that's a farming issue, not a regulatory issue. But that person can be written up on that regulatory item. And so you're regulating the industry out of business. And especially in communities like this where it's a simple lifestyle. They're not highly regulated in their activities up until now. They don't have the knowledge of regulations and how statutes affect. They have no idea why all of you are here, really. And so for us to sit here and listen to
Speaker,
you all try to
time is
figure
up.
that out, it's complicated, and we hope for some help. Thank you.
Speaker 1.
Hi, my name is Lelania Dubois. I've been in Humboldt County since 1978. I was raised amidst the drug war in the 80s. I did not like cannabis, and I did not like how the drug war impacted my community. In 1994, I received a spinal cord injury and got introduced to cannabis as a medicine. That's when I got involved in legalization. I did not get involved in legalization to see my community turn into a big ag community. I got involved in legalization because I wanted to see my community become safe, and I wanted to see patients have greater access. I now participate in my community as a publisher for Sensi Magazine, which allows me to constantly communicate with people transitioning into the industry. I also am a human rights commissioner and the chair of the Human Trafficking Committee. That being said, I'd just like to give you a few numbers. In 2004, our hotline got 60 calls that year for suicide. This year, we got over 279 calls. Those kind of discrepancies in numbers are in our homelessness issues, in our human trafficking issues, in our drug use issues throughout our community. My son walked into his school seeing a friend hanging himself. This room is empty because people are losing their homes, they're losing their lives, they're losing their partners, and not because they're going to jail, but because they're killing themselves and they're giving up. I really hope you take into consideration what this woman said, what you've been hearing here, this policy. This is not working. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 2.
Susan Tibbin. Ms. Huffman, thank you very, very much for telling it like it is. I second that emotion. What more information do we all need, committee, than business in Laytonville and some businesses down 75%, as proved by their tax forms, which we have shared with you from last year and this year? Over a third of the businesses in Garberville are closed now, and layoffs are continuing. On both sides of Highway 101, there are for sale signs on every third or fourth property. People are taking out what loans they can just to pay their basic expenses. We are looking at economic ruin. And so when we talk about having a robust tax base for important programs, are we prepared as a state to bail out Laytonville, Garberville, Leggett, Eureka? Because that is what's happening. There is not one person in this room or in the last 2 meetings that was so hopeful, ready to comply at the Blue Ribbon meeting with Lieutenant Governor Newsom. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 3.
Yes, I'd like to address, first off, I also concur with the comments that have previously been made and also wholly support this recommendation to include these global issues in the report. I also would ask that you consider other issues in the report, including the need for emphasis on education and transition.
Just for clarification, right now the public comment's just on Ms. Huffman's motion.
Absolutely. I think, though, that this is an important subtopic of that issue, because I think that the transition period and how the overregulation has happened is going to play out in enforcement, and that the educational component versus the heavy-handed enforcement aspect could lessen the impact of the overregulation, at least in a temporary fashion. So I think it is related to this specific thing. Additionally, I would frame it in terms of not a barrier to entry, but a barrier also to survival, as Susan just said. I think that those are two very specific things. And additionally, I think that an additional global issue that falls within this is how are the logistics of the provisional licenses going to impact this whole scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 1.
I'm Tim Blake. I'm the founder of the Emerald Cup, and I've been in this business since I was 15. I'm 61, so I've pretty much seen it all. I have multiple licenses. I have a manufacturing permit, nursery, several cultivation permits, and so I see it from all sides. I was here in this room about 3 years ago when everybody came together. We started the 9.31 program in Mendocino County, and we came up to Humboldt to organize all the Humboldt people, and it was a packed house. That's what they're talking about, and it was crowded. They had the supervisors were here. Everybody had a standing ovation and applaud about how we were going to really change Humboldt and really kind of move towards Mendocino and how we're going to really work with this. And as you can see, nobody's here. It's an empty house because they're so demoralized. There's so many houses for sale. There's so much property for sale. I voted for 64. I'm glad we did. We need to get cost-effective access to medicine. You see Coca-Cola bringing CBD out, whether it's good or not. You see where the industry's going. It's a good thing. I'm there for that. Regulation, too. Ms. Husband's very right. We've overregulated this to death. The people that started this industry, you can't do home manufacturing. You see Paul and Susan, they drive you crazy going around the state bugging you guys, but there's 500 people like Paul and Susan, 5,000 that created small products that can't get by. They're just standing up for them all, You look at the small cultivators, the same thing, wiped out. We're trying to keep the Emerald Cup. And by the way, you guys really need to put events on the agenda, because it's events like the Emerald Cup and the farming events that we put on, giving the farmers a place to go to, it's really helped this industry, and it's really, really, led the way. And we've had such a challenge just putting the Emerald Cup on. If it wasn't for our lobbyists and all the time and energy we put in there, we wouldn't even be able to put it on this year, and that would have been a crime. But for me, because I've got all those permits, it's not going to hurt me. I'm a manufacturer. I've got access to most of the things I need. I saw that 3 years ago. But for Paul and Susan, for the people that aren't here, for all the people in these mountains that did that, for all the people I've watched for the last 40 years that made this industry, Gavin came up here and talked a nice spiel and stuff, told everybody we're going to be good. Look, you guys didn't do it. I'm not saying you guys did, but there was a sellout, okay?
Sorry, your time is up.
Sold out for Big Pharma, and you guys need to protect the little people.
Thank you. Speaker 2.
Well, we were a gold sponsor last year at the Emerald Cup, and it was expensive, and so we were hoping to make some money this year to be able to pay for it. But we're barely surviving. The reason this room is empty is because people don't believe in this process. They thought that they were going to get somewhere, and they are like almost nowhere in this county in Humboldt, and it's playing right into the seat of Eureka hands, North County, who do not care about South County, where most of the cannabis is cultivated. As far as they're concerned, it's going just great. We're getting eliminated. That's why this room is empty. People do not believe in the process. They've tried to get compliant, and they're not there yet. So they have garage full of material that they can't do anything with. They have no outlet. There's no centralized processing here in the county for them to go get their material processed, which they were asked, which they have to do now because they don't have the compliant property to do it, so they can't, process on site. So really, what can you guys do for us? That's the big question here. And, you're going to hear, complaints, but what's the solutions? That's what we have to come up with. And so maybe one of the solutions is looking back at, what happened to alcohol? Why are there all these little teeny distilleries suddenly popping up and making money and doing good things? Tax benefits. Now the tax code changed, and these people are able to create these new products and compete against the Anheuser-Busch and the Miller, and now we got Coca-Cola coming in here, announced just the other day that everybody saw. So help us out there, and what Ms. Huffman said is, absolutely right. If the small farmer doesn't get a benefit from what we brought to the table, and now we're going to get our backs stepped on, that just stinks. That's no good. That's not going to be fun for anyone, and you're going to have all these complaints.
Thank you. Time is up.
I think I'm gonna stop. People who've already spoken once at this public comment, ask you to hold off until the next one. Did you already speak at this public comment? You didn't at this. But on this motion, just on this motion, I don't think you. Okay.
No. So I wanted to both commend Ms. Huffman for her statement and also to reiterate the social cost and the function of equity in that. There's been a lot of social cost to families being broken up over time. That's disproportionately affected rural communities, Northern California communities, minority communities. And there needs to be more educational outreach. There was an educational outreach statement that happened through the microbusiness meeting this morning. I would love to see more outreach from all the different aspects to municipalities, to minority organizations, to community groups and things like that to allow disenfranchised people who have felonies that are cannabis-related, nonviolent, to be able to get back in there. A lot of our skilled workers have barriers to entry to this industry. And we need to figure out how to lower those barriers or to work with them to bring them in, or we're going to lose a lot of that knowledge base that built this industry itself as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Speaker 1.
Thank Ms. Huffman for her comments. They were very to the point. And it goes even further than that. I'm running up and down the state making comments, and the reason I'm doing it is the only way I can stay in business. I can't afford to hire an attorney to come to these. I can't afford to hire a lobbyist. And a lot of my community doesn't believe it makes a difference. They see me coming to meetings, they listen to these meetings, and they don't see any changes. So, they don't take their time there. Some of them are back in the hill, burying their head, trying to get one more year, another year out of it. There's also a very interesting thing in this aspect is that the north part of the state is being punished. If you go down to Los Angeles, you get a warehouse and you get busted, it's a misdemeanor. But up here, you are rolled over with every agency that the state can bring to bear, from Fish and Wildlife to any environmental thing, because the cultivation is not where the money is in making the arrest anymore. So along with that, social equity is really trying to find an equitable way to enforce enforcement evenly across the state, because people up here are losing their properties, they're losing their livelihoods because of the way it's being enforced. And I think that that really needs to be a part of Ms. Huffman's statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's vote.
Boboian.
Aye.
Cermak. Clifford.
Aye.
Farrow. Heidelback Terremoto. Harada. Huffman. Jacobson. Leff.
Aye.
Nevada.
Aye.
Nikita.
Aye.
Peck.
Aye.
Stevenson. Todd.
Aye.
Williams. Aye. Woolsey.
Aye.
You.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm going to suggest, if they are willing, Dr. Cermak?
I'm willing to write a brief statement to be included, if someone would help me, one person, that would identify those overarching concerns which we have brought up in the whole committee over this last year that we believe threaten the industry and need to be addressed in a direct way in the near future. Then when that got presented to the committee as a whole, anything that got put in that, any particular item could be voted out. Any particular item that got left out could be voted in, but it would be a brief statement that we have these overarching concerns.
Okay, so you are volunteering to be on the committee to draft this
I am.
part of the report. Is there someone else who would, okay, Mr. Baboulian, or
That's fine.
do you want to fight it out, or
No, I
one
do
of you?
not want to fight it out.
Okay, is there,
Fastest answer.
okay, then I will have my prerogative to appoint Dr. Cermak and Mr. Baboulian to draft that component of the report for us to review in November. Thank you.
In November.
Yeah, draft. So of the two separate components of the report, the two teams can't work with each other, but you work individually on your own pieces, and they'll both be presented to us in November. Okay, other additions to the report?
In the micro business subcommittee today, we
Yeah.
made 3 motions. One of the motions somebody addressed here was trying to get the Bureau to provide to municipalities some guidance for micro businesses and of course, you'll have, whoever's writing it should use access, because we don't have the actual text of how it is, and I didn't, as I was speaking it, and the people that were speaking it didn't have it exact. But one was a motion to say that we should tell them that on the manufacturing type 1 license, it is very broad. There's lots of things under the type 1 license that you can do. However, because agricultural in this area, the small farmers do not have access to some of the more I don't know how you would say them, but maybe more process-oriented or more hazardous processes. They would be prohibited from, high-pressure extractions potentially, or high-hazard flammable extraction processes, but they might be able to do water titrations or baking of products at home from titrations and stuff like that, infused products. And we had asked that they be able to provide that to municipalities, some like Humboldt here, so that way they could take advantage of having a cultivation, a small cultivation, have a self-distribution license, and have the ability to do a manufacturing and be able to qualify under the micro business. We couldn't get an agreement on, and one of those things that I think happens in Ms. Huffman's that we've all talked about, is the idea of micro not actually being micro, and maybe being able to put together a regulatory recommendation. We just ran out of time. That would say that you could make tiered micro business. So one would be like, for lack of a better term, is craft might be specific to a geographic area and constraints that you would have here. One would be more like a general micro business that you could do more, and one might be a commercial micro business that might lend itself to some of the bigger animals that are coming in and moving into our area. The other thing that we talked about was to try to be a bridge between the regulatory ability versus the legislative ability, was making sure there was a recommendation that said that nurseries were included, that you could have non-volatile titration / infused products, that you might be able to have event sales as one of the sales options that you have, and that you have non-storefront delivery. That was one of the discussions that we had. And then the last piece was, I think, again, on the other agencies being here. I know that some people says we talk to them all, but it would be really good, I think it would be respectful to all of you to make sure that we have all the agencies that have a say in this. And Ms. Hoffman's making a proposal that we can bind them, and that's great. If that happens, we should. But until that point happens, I think we have an obligation to, you know, the constituents and the workers to say that all of these agencies should have a presence at these meetings. Yep. So that was what we, and I don't know how we would put that, in which group we would put that, but that was the...
There was a third one, right? So we also this morning made a motion and passed a motion as a microbusiness subcommittee to request that the prohibition on home businesses be removed so long as the activities allowed inside the home followed the state's guidance for, say, cottage and home businesses. But beyond that, I'm wondering if, as drafters of the report, if we will be provided with notes from this morning's subcommittee meeting so that we can actually include the motions that were passed.
What's the timing on getting notes?
There will be notes. I'm not sure. We had a court reporter there. I'm not sure what the turnaround time would be, but the transcript would be available before the November meeting typically.
So we can expect them, I mean, as drafters, we could expect them sometime 10 days prior to the November meeting, hopefully earlier, but would that be?
I can't, ideally it would be prior to that, but I can't give you an exact date right now.
I mean, I guess, so my suggestion is, if we're not prepared to make a motion to vote on that as a full committee today, that we include it as a subsection of the discussion of the content of the report at the November meeting, where there's maybe, hopefully, some prep notes allowing of the drafters to sort of prepare that piece, and then we have it as a sub-agenda item on when we review the report at the November meeting.
Yeah, I don't know that we could vote it because it wasn't an agenda item to vote based on recommendations.
Right, unless we voted.
And so that's why I didn't, request for a specific readback of what the minutes were. I think that you're right. You could.
I think that's right. I mean, we did vote on one just for inclusion in the report, but it doesn't. My guess is that we're not prepared today to vote on that package of them.
Well, what I think you could do is when you get the notes, you can currently, I think the beauty of it is that you could probably make a draft that says that it was recommended by committee, and if at the next meeting, the full committee then votes on it, you can amend it to say recommended by the subcommittee and approved by the full committee on each of those items, and that would help you move faster towards that.
Madam Chair?
Okay.
Yeah. Just to comment on that, I was at the meeting this morning on the subcommittee meeting, and I think that if there's going to be a subcommittee meeting, then when we have our general meeting later in the day, that there should be an update on what happened at that meeting. So it was a very good meeting, and it's unfortunate that the rest of the people that are here aren't aware of what happened in the motion. So that would be a suggestion and a way to handle that. And also, I'll address it at the next item. Thank you.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. So instead of acting on a motion now, I think we include that as a specific. Okay. The other thing I want to comment on the drafting of the report for our drafting subcommittee is that we are going to need a review in advance of the November 8th meeting, a draft. So we should talk about setting a deadline, maybe a little bit prior to when the agenda is put out for a draft to go out, so everyone's reviewed it prior to the meeting.
Yeah, I'm amicable to that.
Okay.
And then if we can just, I think, get some guidance about, what that deadline looks like, and then who we're distributing it to. So are we, Beverly and I sending it to staff, and then, so.
Right, and Melanie can help with that, right? Okay. Other comments on item C?
I do
Yes.
have a comment on item C. I think that we have had a lot of meetings where we have repeatedly been asked to agendize items. Events are one of those. Tribal issues is another one. And I'm sure there's others that are eluding me, but I would really appreciate if we could include those in the report. And I don't know if there's a listing of those where I could look, how do I account for those as we're drafting? Because
They would be in all the minutes. So I think in all
So
the
I can
minutes
just
of
go
the
through the
meetings,
minutes and
when
pull
we have
those
that
out?
last agenda item, the ideas that everyone puts out are at least included, even if they're
And
not
so
reflected in the
is that appropriate for us to include? Because I think it's important that we keep kind of a running list of what we've
Yeah.
accomplished and what we still have on our plate.
I think it is included under even what it statutorily says the report is supposed to include, which is the activities of the committee, which is what we talk about at the meetings. Okay, any other comments on C, additional things to add to the report, the draft report? Okay. Then we will turn to public comment on the third agenda item, which is the annual report. I'll add, I'm going to reduce the time for public comment to a minute rather than 2 minutes to make sure we can get through it. And then I also want to let folks know that the next item on the agenda is public comment for items not on the agenda. So if you have a public comment specifically on the report, now would be the time to give it, but if it's on anything else, the next item on the agenda is broader public comment.
Hello. I would like to hopefully add some items for you to consider. One would be standards for consumption for retail businesses. At this point, it's pretty difficult for local jurisdictions to regulate those. Working with the local health department, they don't consider cannabis a additive to the food code, so it's not something that they regulate. And as a small local jurisdiction, we're having difficulty understanding what those spaces would be like to have consumption in a retail venue. Also, I'd like you to consider accessory retail sales sites for businesses that are not primarily conducting cannabis as their primary business. Let's say it's a small tourism business that sells t-shirts, postcards, and maybe they have a small area for cannabis sales. It's really accessory sales. I think at this point that the regulatory environment is, and the taxes are kind of...
Sorry, your time is up.
And events, local jurisdictions, events, we want those.
Speaker 3.
Hi, my name is Whitney Ogle. I'm a professor at Humboldt State University and a member of the Humboldt Institute for Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research. And we'd like to know a specific timeline about when we know that money is going to be going towards research and where that money is going to be allocated. So that would be nice to know.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is public comment on items not on the agenda.
Three minutes? 1 minute?
1 minute.
Oh my gosh. Okay, speed talking. Sorry, court reporter. As I mentioned earlier, the issue of provisional licenses and the logistics around the transition from the end of temporary licenses, the provisional licenses, and into annual licenses is an incredibly difficult thing to plan for. People are going to have a lot of changes based on the changed circumstances, changing from different types of cultivation, different business models, et cetera, and that really needs to be planned for. Additional tools to assist small and rural operators, mix and match. I raised some of these issues in the Microbusiness Subcommittee this morning, but I just want to briefly hit upon them, allowing different cultivation styles under one license rather than separate licenses, single cycle light deprivation, having a different tier of both fee and license, cottage nurseries, adjusting rules for distributor transport only until we can get the transportation license under cultivation or CDFA, to remove some of the requirements
Time
like
is up,
insurance.
Speaker. Thank you. Speaker 2.
Hello, I think I'll continue on what she's talking about the transition for transitioning existing cultivators and other operators, and the inconsistency in the guidance that we are receiving, which means that there is inconsistency in the guidance that the review processors are receiving, maybe from heads up. We're a little unclear about that, but we hear very different things from them, and guidelines seem to change without giving any notice to operators, applicants, or the people who are assisting them in those programs. For example, one day it was that we needed to have composts clearly marked for each license. That might be multiple licenses on a parcel. Then all of a sudden it was not required anymore, and we could have shared composting, and then some of them are getting kicked back and denied, which means that someone cannot work. They cannot sell their product that they've been working on all year if they are denied a license. And they're trying to enter this regulatory program, but if they don't delineate the square footage. So we just have an inconsistency going on. Thank you.
Speaker 3.
Yes, again, we'd like to bring up Sean Trainer with Sensi Valley, the incentive programs that are discussed throughout the statutory items and the regulatory items for disproportionately affected communities, and the developers that are providing tools to lower the thresholds for more equitable participation by those in the disadvantaged communities that was created. We'd like to see some of those incentives put forth so that we can start benefiting from them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tibbin, as we move forward, hopefully, with the cottage license, cottage microbusiness, we would request that the CAC look more closely at security, which may be, it may work for a bank, perhaps in Los Angeles, but it does not work for small operators. We would like to see site-specific, looking at the conditions as they are, what activities are being generated, and we like the security plan to be reasonable and not create an undue burden on the small operator. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and we will move on to agenda number 5, which is future agenda items, and I'll open it up for discussion. You go first.
I know that we've had several items already on, and we can't get to the ones we have on, such as the tribes issue and the equity issue in deep depth. Why would we add any now when we can't get the ones off of our, unless there's something that's not already on the list? I think we've got a lot of stuff to cover for the next meeting. That would be my recommendation, as we work from the list we already have.
From the list. Okay, we have. But do you want to speak? Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to say, just reiterate the same thing and say that Kristen and Jeff are not carrying my water. But I'm going to keep bringing this up, just as they have, is that, and just as you said, Jeff, is that we have brought up numerous agenda items that need to be added, and they aren't there. We have what was here today. And so my concern is that we need to take a list of the future agenda items that we've already spewed out, and we need to have them at the next meeting. And if we need to put them each month, that these are the 2 we're going to address this month all the way down the line, then I think we have to get that specific, because they aren't coming to the table. And that's my concern. So I think we need to figure out a way to address some of these things that are always at the end of the agenda or end of a topic, and then it's just pushed, and they don't, and especially for the public comment, they don't get to comment on it. So, and I think that the biggest asset that this committee has is the public comment. And as it's been said earlier today, we're here to help the public in order to make them successful in this industry. So I feel like we can't ignore these agenda items anymore. So if someone could prepare the list, go back on the minutes, see all of the agenda items that already have been mentioned, rather than, as you said, Jeff, add more to the list. We need to deal with the ones that we've been bringing up for the last 4 or 5 months. Thank you.
Okay. I think also, and Tamara, correct me, I mean, maybe it's appropriate to add as an agenda item for the next meeting a discussion about how the agendas are created and the process and how we as a group are going to prioritize things. That's different from the future agenda items, that we have a conversation as a group about how to create the agenda?
I think if you want to talk about your agenda process and not just future items, and you want to take any action as to what that process would be, you would need to separately agendize. Right now, your handbook does have guidance on how on setting the agenda.
Okay, so I guess I would add as a future agenda item for the next meeting that we talk about how we create agendas. Yes.
And I do think, too, that it would be helpful, I don't know if the committee's aware, but that the state has passed 7 bills, and I don't know if you can all rattle them off, but I think it's important because as I look through it, I just got the notice today at Marijuana Business that there's a couple that we did advise, and I think that it would be nice for us to know what those bills are as a committee. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but you may want to look them up.
Okay, so future agenda items, sort of a legislative update, and we'll know what the governor signed by the next meeting. Yes, Mr. Stevenson.
First of all, I'd like to thank everyone that's come out. Many of the faces continue to come out and show support and play a part of the process. As someone that's actively involved in the industry, I understand exactly everything of what you say. However, some things I'm able to empathize with you. Some things I'm able to sympathize with you. I've heard a lot of wonderful things. I've heard feedback. This has been a dialogue. It hasn't been a monologue. And the members of the commission hear you, and to some extent, our hands are tied. However, there are many things that we can continue to do, and I'd ask that everyone just continue to fight and not tire. This has been an arduous task. If you look at where we were many years ago, the state had no involvement. Now the state is regulating, albeit to everyone's different comfort, but there's so much to do. I heard the professor today state that Humboldt University wants to be a part of the process, and I absolutely believe that it's imperative that academia is involved, and not just from a UC point of view. And I think UCs, the CSUs, need to be involved, and with so much rich history that's really held in this geographical area, it would be absolutely a crime against humanity for Humboldt State not to be involved in the research of cannabis. I think that we need to look at how the dollars, or at least voice to some extent that the funding for research is spread across the board and not just concentrated with the UCs or particular universities that have more of a stronger relationship at the Capitol, and that we look at what's best for the industry. So thank you all for coming out.
Okay, others with future agenda items?
Yes, I'd like for the staff at our next meeting to tell us what the operating rules are for this committee. When do we have elections? How do officers stay in? Do we have anniversaries? Do we have parties? I'd like to know.
Yeah.
We should have rules.
Okay, there's a handbook, right, Tamara, that we have? What?
They used to have an election every year.
We can add that to the agenda for next time, and establish a party planning committee, if you want, of only 2. Okay, other agenda items?
I have a question, and maybe turns into an agenda item.
Yeah.
At these meetings, they're very specific in locations, whether it's LA, whether it's SAC, whether it's Eureka, San Diego. Stakeholders always take the time and the effort to come and participate. We're obviously all here, and it's all volunteer. And a lot of the discussions do go back to local versus state and where the bottleneck is and land use. And if this is all about education and taking it up and down the state for education purposes, is there a way to have local representation at these hearings, maybe sitting and listening and participating in the process so they can hear from us and the stakeholders? And maybe put that on the agenda to create a mechanism to be able to get that to happen?
Right, like an official invite that we would.
Yeah, whether it's a mayor, whether it's a council member, city manager, somebody representing local municipality, wherever it may be, sitting here, hearing it, participating in it, and just being part of the process.
Okay. Okay, we will now open it up for public comment on future agenda items.
I'd like to speak very briefly on your comment. If we look at Mendocino County as an example, there is a big disconnect between what Mendocino County is doing, or more to the point, not doing, and what you all are working on, and what citizens in the county would like to see happen. So I want to second that, and we strongly hope that stakeholders will be viewed not just as farmers or manufacturers, but city officials, county officials need to be part of this process, as well as the various agencies like DPH. We can't be all on the same railroad car, but at least maybe we can be on the same train. Thanks.
Thank you. Speaker one.
I'd just like to request, since I ran out of time, if you could agendize a topic of additional tools to help small operators, both small farmers and small operators, not necessarily tied to micro businesses. Talk about discrete, specific tools. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker two.
Yeah, hi. I don't know if we didn't hear about this because I don't think there was anybody here representing the retail segment, and maybe that's why. But I do have concerns over the structure of the cannabis event organizer and special cannabis event licenses and them not being accessible to producers, small producers or otherwise. And I would like to see there be some discussion of how to make that available to them. I think that's an important component of the success of small producers. And I have a lot of suggestions. I have submitted comments through the comment period as well, but I just wanted to bring that up here and see if that can get discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker three.
Yeah, I second that. We used to do a lot of small farmers markets, and it was amazing what it did. People from the Bay Area come up to Area 101, my place in Mendocino, and it'd be a wonderful gathering with the community and the farmers and getting together, kind of a little small mini Emerald Cup. And you're all invited to come to the Emerald Cup if you'd like to come see that in action. It'd be really wonderful to see you all. You're all invited. And what Keith was saying, there's 110 clinical trials going on in Israel right now. 110 for cannabis and CBD. Okay, where are we? How come our universities, how come Humboldt isn't working on that? Why aren't we all involved in this? Because you guys are all aware, Canada's taking over the world markets, Colombians, the Mexicans, the Israelis, and good for them, but we're sitting here talking about how to just, fight our ways out of this paper bag. So I really want to applaud the lady, Ms. Johnson, or whoever, that brought the testing right in line, because you cannot understand the significance of that, because what the one gentleman was saying about THC and everybody looking for the highest THC, it was making all the labs throw all the variables off and stuff, and so getting that in line. So you guys do some great work, and I really applaud you. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker one.
I just want to make a comment that maybe that this committee could encourage other local counties and municipalities to create like committees to help support them through this process, because it is quite complicated. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker three.
So I would like to see an agendized item that talks about how public-private partnerships can work with colleges and universities within the state of California. I think a lot of the problems that they have with getting into this is they don't know how it fits into a federal framework, how it fits into a state framework, and they don't want to move into it and, put themselves into a position where they're not being aware of their own responsibilities for their own institutions. So some sort of a directive for higher institution learning and research to allow people to be able to spotlight that and go into it in a way that is compliant. So,
Thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
You don't have to have it.
Oh.
If you do,
Okay.
call roll call.
Oh, I do? Now I have to call. Okay. Okay, meeting's adjourned.